Hey everyone, I'm AfterMOON Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. It started with a sound I couldn't forget, a short, cracked sob echoing through the alley behind our street. I was 12, and back then, I didn't understand what fear really was. My mom said I had a habit of noticing things I shouldn't. I suppose she was right. I carried my little cassette recorder everywhere, one of those cheap silver ones with a red record button that clicked loud enough to feel like a heartbeat. I used it to capture bird calls, conversations on the bus, even the weird hum our fridge made. But that night, the sob I heard didn't sound like any of those things. It sounded like someone trying not to be heard at all. I crept closer, keeping the recorder hidden under my jacket. The noise was coming from a girl, maybe 16, crouched near the rubbish bins, hugging her knees. Her breath came in ragged bursts. I didn't say anything. I just pressed record. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. When she looked up and saw me, her face went pale, and she whispered something I didn't catch before bolting into the dark. I went home, rewound the tape, and played it again. The sound of her crying filled my room, uneven, desperate, real. I must have listened 20 times before falling asleep. The next day, Mom was making porridge when I heard her mutter something about a missing girl on the radio. I froze halfway through a spoonful. The name didn't sound familiar, but the place did near the bins where I'd been. They said she hadn't come home after work. My stomach tightened. I went upstairs and pressed play again. Her sobs filled the room like a ghost breathing through the speakers. I told myself it couldn't be her. It was just coincidence. That was the first tape. Over the next year, I made more dozens, maybe. People crying, arguing, moaning in pain. I didn't hurt anyone. I just happened to be there. A man yelling after a crash, a woman crying outside the pharmacy, a child screaming when he fell off his bike. I captured everything, cataloged it carefully with dates and places written on the cassettes in my shaky handwriting. I called it the Sound Archive. I thought I was building something important, something no one else noticed. But Dundee wasn't a big city, and bad news travels fast. One evening, Mom came into my room with that cautious tone she used when she didn't want to scare me. "You've heard about those disappearances, 3 in the past 6 months. I nodded, pretending I hadn't. She sighed. "It's awful. Young folk, just gone. Stay close to home. Promise me that." I promised. But when she left, I opened my drawer and looked at my tapes. The dates matched the weeks of each disappearance. I remember my hands shaking as I counted. 3 people gone, 3 tapes labeled with those same days. I told myself I was imagining things. It was just timing, coincidence again. But one night, I heard something that stripped away all excuses. It was November, cold enough that my breath fogged inside my room. I couldn't sleep, so I slipped my earphones on and listened to my latest tape, a recording from earlier that day at the bus stop. Mostly chatter, traffic, the usual. But halfway through, a sound came that didn't belong. A voice, low, slow, male. It said, "Stop crying, someone's listening." Then silence. I yanked off the earphones. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd wake Mom. I rewound it and listened again. Same voice, same words, clearer now, like he was whispering straight into the mic. I hadn't heard him when I was there. How could I not have? I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, staring at the recorder like it could talk back. I wanted to tell someone, Mom, the police, anyone, but what would I even say? "Hi, I record people without asking and found a voice that might belong to a murderer. They'd think I was mental." So I did nothing. I kept recording. In early '99, everything shifted. A boy from my school, Callum, went missing. He was 2 years older than me, always laughing too loud in the hallways. They found his backpack by the Tay River, but not him. The whole town went quiet for weeks. I remember feeling something I didn't understand then, guilt mixed with anticipation. That night, I checked my tapes again. Sure enough, one had January 14 City Center scrawled on it. That was the day Callum disappeared. I pressed play, and what I heard still crawls under my skin. At first, just chatter, distant laughter, maybe Callum's voice. Then, faintly, that same deep whisper from before, "Don't run this time." Then nothing but wind. I stared at the tape like it might burst into flames. I wanted to destroy it, but I couldn't. Something in me, curiosity, fear, maybe something darker, made me rewind it again and again until the tape stretched thin. A week later, I started noticing him. Not clearly, but enough to feel watched. A tall man, always just far enough away across the street, near the bus stop, outside the corner shop. I'd glance up, and he'd already be gone. I convinced myself it was paranoia from listening to too many creepy sounds. But one afternoon, as I walked home from school, I heard my own recorder clicking from inside my backpack. I hadn't touched it. I froze, pulled it out, and saw the red light flashing. Someone had turned it on. When I played it that night, I nearly dropped it. The tape started with my footsteps. Then that voice again. "You like listening, don't you?" I tore out the batteries, threw the recorder across the room, and buried it under my bed. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I told Mum I felt sick and stayed home. She left for work, promising to bring soup later. I thought about going to the police, but how could I explain? Instead, I decided to destroy everything, the recorder, the tapes, all of it. I dumped the box on my bed, my fingers trembling as I fed the cassettes into a plastic bag. One by one, I cracked them open. Inside the plastic reels, I noticed something odd, thin strands of hair tangled in the tape. Some brown, some blonde. I didn't know if I was hallucinating, but the sight made bile rise in my throat. Then came a knock at the door. 3 soft taps. I froze. Mum wouldn't knock. She had keys. The curtains were drawn so I couldn't see who it was. Another knock, slower this time. "Hello?" a voice called. Male. Calm. "Is your mum in?" I didn't answer. He tried again. "You left something near the bus stop." My stomach dropped. No one should have known about the bus stop. I stayed perfectly still, my hand over my mouth. After a long pause, footsteps retreated, then silence. I waited another full minute before moving. When I finally peeked out the window, the street was empty except for a small object on the doorstep, my recorder. It was clean, too clean. The casing looked polished, almost new. I picked it up with shaking hands and noticed fresh batteries inside. Against every instinct, I pressed play. It began with that same low breathing I'd heard before. Then the sound of my own voice, muffled, recorded from somewhere close. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Except I hadn't said that. I rewound it, thinking it was a glitch, but it repeated exactly. My voice, words I never spoke. Then came another voice, his. "You shouldn't have stopped listening." I threw it across the room again, this time shattering it. The batteries rolled under the bed. I didn't go near it for days. Mum noticed my behavior, of course. "You're pale as chalk, love," she said one night. "Is someone bullying you?" I wanted to tell her, but I couldn't find the right words. All I managed was, "I think someone's following me." She frowned, said we'd talk to the head teacher in the morning. But that night, everything came undone. I woke to the sound of muffled sobbing downstairs. At first, I thought Mum had fallen asleep watching TV. But when I crept down the hall, the living room was dark. The sound was coming from the kitchen, low, trembling, exactly like one of my recordings. I inched forward and saw the cassette deck sitting on the table. One of my tapes was spinning inside, though I hadn't touched it in days. The sobbing grew louder, then stopped. A new voice filled the room. He likes to listen. I recognized it instantly, his voice. Then mine followed, stuttering, pleading, "Please stop, I'll delete them." But those weren't real words I'd ever said. My skin went cold. The tape was replaying a conversation that never happened. The front door creaked open. I froze, staring toward the sound. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, coat hanging to his knees. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. He stepped inside slowly, shutting the door behind him like he lived there. "You kept my gifts," he said softly. "I wondered when you'd play them again." I backed away until I hit the wall. My mind went blank, my limbs stiff. "What do you want?" I whispered. He smiled faintly, tilting his head. "To be remembered." Before I could move, Mum's voice shouted from upstairs, calling my name. He turned sharply toward the stairs. That break, that half-second distraction was enough. I bolted out the back door barefoot, running through the garden and down the alley, not stopping until I reached the neighbor's house. I banged on their door like a madman until Mrs. Callahan opened it, startled. I couldn't speak, I just pointed toward our house. She called the police. They arrived minutes later, but he was gone. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. Just the broken recorder and my scattered tapes. Mum kept asking what happened, but I couldn't form sentences that made sense. They thought I'd imagined it. Shock, maybe. They took the tapes. For evidence anyway. 2 weeks passed before a detective visited our house. He had that weary look people get when they've seen too much. He said quietly, "We've reviewed the tapes. Some of them match the last known sounds of the missing people. Exact timestamps, voices we've confirmed through family members." My heart thudded so hard it hurt. "How did you get those recordings?" he asked. I told him everything, the crying girl, the bus stop, the whispers. He listened without interrupting, though his eyes said he didn't believe half of it. When I finished, he sighed. "We traced the voice," he said. "The man you heard died in 1995. He worked maintenance at an old mental hospital outside town. Same year, it shut down." I didn't know what to say. Then how he held up a hand. "We don't know, but whatever you recorded, it's not coming from anyone alive." That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the empty spot where my tapes used to be. I thought about his words to be remembered. Maybe that's all he wanted. Maybe those cries weren't random after all. Maybe he'd been collecting them too, long before I started. I stopped recording after that. Threw away every mic, every phone app that made sound. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the wind hums through the alley, I still hear faint sobs beneath the noise. Short, broken ones, like the first I ever captured. I tell myself it's just memory. But when I lie still enough, I swear I can hear the soft click of a recorder starting again and my own voice, whispering into the dark, "I'm still listening." Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. I first met her on a Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't mean anything until years later, when you realize it was the day everything quietly began to unravel. Her name was Eveline Krause, and she owned a little flower shop across from my apartment in Linz. I used to stop there after work, mostly for the smell, damp soil, roses, lilies, that strange sweetness of decay that somehow felt comforting. She was always there behind the counter, gray hair pinned back, gentle eyes that looked at you too long, like she was memorizing your face for a reason she wouldn't say out loud. At first, I thought she was just lonely. She talked in that slow, careful way older people sometimes do, every word measured, every pause heavy. But she wasn't frail or forgetful. No, Eveline was precise. Her hands never shook when she wrapped stems in paper. Her handwriting on every tag was perfect, almost ceremonial. And there was something else about her. She seemed fascinated by death. She'd talk about funerals like other people talked about weddings. How every coffin should have a soul of its own. How flowers could speak to the departed. I didn't think much of it then. She supplied half the town's wreaths anyway. A few weeks after I became a regular, she asked if I wanted to see her private workspace. I said sure, assuming she meant the storage room behind the shop. But she led me down a narrow stairwell I hadn't noticed before, through a door that smelled faintly of formaldehyde and soil. It wasn't a normal basement. There were several tables set up like stations, ribbons, cards, floral foam, and coffin-size arrangements laid out with eerie precision. "I decorate for those who can't afford a funeral florist," she said, brushing her fingers along a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. "Sometimes the families have no one. I make sure they still leave this world with dignity." I remember feeling touched. She was quiet, strange, but kind, the kind of woman who spent her evenings helping the forgotten. I even offered to help once, thinking it might be a good thing to do on weekends. She smiled and said softly, "Maybe one day." Over the next months, I noticed something odd. Every time she spoke about her volunteer work, she mentioned specific details that sounded personal. The age of the deceased, how they looked in the casket, what they'd loved in life. But when I'd ask how she knew that, she'd say, "They remind me of someone I used to be." At first, I thought she meant nostalgia. But as the details grew eerier, I realized she wasn't talking about resemblance. She meant they fit into her own life somehow. One day, I came in for my usual sunflowers, and Eveline wasn't behind the counter. Instead, the shop was dark except for a single lamp near the window. I called out, and she appeared from the back, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, formal, almost like mourning attire. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wet, as if she'd been crying. "I had to finish a special arrangement," she said. "A woman about my age, divorced, lived alone for many years, no children." The resemblance was uncanny. I didn't know what to say. I offered some awkward words of sympathy, but she smiled in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Don't be sad," she said. "I've given her a beautiful farewell. I even used my favorite lilies." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. My favorite lilies. Who says that about someone else's funeral? A few days later, I saw a missing person notice pinned outside the post office, a woman named Marta Vogel, 54, last seen near the marketplace. The description made my heart skip. Divorced, no children, brown hair streaked with gray. Her photo looked like she could have been Eveline's sister. I tried to brush it off, but the coincidence gnawed at me. That evening, I went back to the flower shop, but it was closed early. Through the window, I could see her moving inside, arranging white lilies. I told myself it wasn't my business. Linz is small, and small towns breed paranoia. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that Eveline's volunteer work might not be what she claimed, so I started watching. From my apartment window, I could see her back entrance. Some nights, she'd go out carrying black plastic bags, long and heavy, loading them into her old van. She always left around midnight, always came back before dawn. One night, my curiosity got the better of me. I followed her van. She drove through the quiet outskirts of Linz, down narrow roads that led toward the industrial district. She stopped behind the crematorium, the municipal one. She parked in the shadows, opened the back, and dragged out a long bundle wrapped in dark cloth. I froze. She wasn't supposed to have access there at night, yet she moved with total familiarity, like someone who belonged. I couldn't see what she did next, but I heard a metallic creak, like a door opening, and then silence. When she returned, She looked lighter, relieved. The next morning, I confronted her in the shop. I asked if she'd been working at the crematorium late at night. Her expression didn't even flicker. "You followed me," she said. It wasn't a question, just calm acknowledgement. "I was finishing an arrangement," she added, voice soft, steady. "I like to deliver them personally." I didn't know what to reply. Something about her composure made me back down. But then she said, "You'd make a lovely arrangement yourself. You have peaceful eyes." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. From then on, things between us changed. Every time I entered the shop, she'd pause whatever she was doing and just look at me, not angry, studying me. Once, she reached out and touched my wrist, her fingers cold, and said, "You understand loss. That's why you notice things others don't." A month passed like that, until one evening, I came home to find an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a funeral program. My name was printed at the top in loving memory of my full name. The date was next Saturday. My throat tightened. It listed the flower shop as the provider and Eveline as funeral director. I ran across the street immediately, but her shop was locked. Through the glass, I could see a new arrangement on display: black roses, white lilies, and a card that read, "Reserved." I pounded on the door until my fists hurt. No answer. That night, I barely slept. My phone kept buzzing from an unknown number. Every time I answered, I'd hear faint breathing and a whisper, "It's ready." I unplugged the phone and sat by the window until sunrise, waiting for her lights to turn on. They never did. The next day, I went to the police. They listened politely until I showed them the funeral program. The officer frowned, but said it could be a prank. He agreed to check the shop. When we got there, the door was unlocked this time. Inside, the air smelled sickly sweet, not flowers, but something spoiled. The officer called out her name. No answer. We moved through the store, and when we reached the back, I noticed a new wreath on her workbench, white and yellow, with a ribbon that said, "Eternal Peace, Eveline Krause." My blood ran cold. There was a folded letter beside it, addressed to the one who watched. My hands trembled as I opened it. "If you are reading this, then you have seen what I've done. I've been preparing for years." Each of them carried a part of me: the mother I never became, the lover I lost, the sister I buried, the woman I could have been. I built their farewells piece by piece until the circle was complete. You are the last one, the witness, the replacement. Do not be afraid. Everything has already been arranged. The officer took the letter, but I could tell he didn't understand its meaning the way I did. He called for backup. While he waited, I looked around the basement again. Behind the curtain where I'd once seen her making bouquets, there was something covered with a white sheet. The smell was stronger there. Against his orders, I lifted the edge of the sheet. It was a coffin. Not wood, something more modern, matte gray, perfectly arranged with flowers around the border. Inside lay Eveline herself, dressed in that same black gown I'd seen before. Her hands were folded neatly, and a faint smile rested on her lips. The strangest part? The coffin wasn't old. The flowers were fresh, freshly cut, just like her work. But it didn't make sense she was dead. Yet the arrangements around her were all recent. Someone had placed her there recently. That's when the officer noticed something else, another coffin beside it, sealed shut, identical. My name was engraved on the small plaque at the foot. They opened it at the station later. It was empty, except for a bouquet and a folded note. "You will make sure it's beautiful." The police treated it as a suicide, a lonely florist who prepared her own burial. They never connected her to the missing people I'd mentioned. Her records were spotless, no evidence of foul play, no fingerprints besides her own. The missing women's cases faded into unsolved archives. And somehow, Despite everything, the shop reopened under new management 3 months later. I tried to move on, but something inside me changed. I couldn't walk past a flower shop again without feeling watched. One evening, I returned home to find a small delivery box on my doorstep. No return address, just a white ribbon. Inside were white lilies, arranged perfectly around a small silver card. It said, "For the one who finished what I started." I took it straight to the police, but they dismissed it as coincidence. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Every night, I'd dream of her standing behind the counter, wrapping stems in paper, smiling gently. "Don't be sad," she'd whisper. "We're all flowers waiting to wilt." Months later, my neighbor, a young woman who'd just moved into Evelyn's old apartment above the shop, came to my door. She said she'd found something strange under the floorboards, a small wooden box filled with pressed flowers and photographs. One of the photos was of me, taken from behind while I stood in her shop months ago. On the back, written in that perfect script of hers, it said, "The final bloom." That's when I realized what she meant in her letter. Each victim had been someone who reflected a piece of her life. And I was the one who'd seen her story to the end, the observer, the replacement, the next caretaker of her ritual. She hadn't chosen me to die, she'd chosen me to remember. Still, sometimes I wonder if that's worse, because even now, years later, every bouquet I see feels like a message, every ribbon looks like handwriting, and every time I catch the faint scent of lilies, I hear her voice again, calm, certain, and unbearably close, whispering, "It's ready." I was halfway through my second year at the teacher's college when I started babysitting for extra cash. Rotorua was small, and word spread fast when someone reliable could watch kids without charging much. I had regulars, neighbors, co-workers, even my professor's sister, but that night was different. I remember it so clearly because nothing about it felt wrong at first. The call came from a woman named Caroline Parker. Her voice was soft, careful, almost too polite. She said she got my number from the agency. I didn't work with any agency, but back then, people mixed up recommendations all the time. She sounded kind and desperate, said her husband had an emergency shift, and she didn't trust leaving her 2 children alone. I agreed. I wish I hadn't. Caroline gave me the address over the phone, 34 Mackenzie Street, near the lake. I knew the area. Quiet, well-kept, mostly older houses. When I arrived, I noticed the curtains drawn, lights low but warm, like someone wanted to appear welcoming without being noticed. Caroline opened the door before I even knocked. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, dressed neatly in a long green cardigan. Her eyes were striking light gray, almost silvery but distant, like she was watching something behind me. She smiled when she saw me. "You must be Emma. Thank you for coming so quickly." Inside, the house smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil. Clean, but too clean, like a hospital trying to hide the scent of antiseptic. 2 children, a boy around 6 and a girl maybe 4, sat on the couch watching a cartoon. They barely looked up when I entered. Caroline introduced them as Henry and Lily, then handed me a small list written in neat handwriting. Dinner at 7, bedtime at 8, milk before bed. Simple. She didn't linger. Said she'd be back by 10 and left in a hurry, barely giving the kids a goodbye. The door clicked, and for a long moment, the house felt completely still. I tried to break the awkward silence. "Hey, you 2 hungry?" They nodded but didn't speak. I remember thinking maybe they were shy or used to different sitters. I went to the kitchen to make sandwiches and noticed something strange. There was almost nothing in the fridge. A bottle of milk, a jar of jam, and 1 carton of eggs. The pantry was the same, just a few tins, a loaf of bread, and a layer of dust. Still, I made dinner and tried to act normal. The kids ate quietly, side by side, not once talking to each other. When I asked what they liked to do, Lily said, "We can't go upstairs. Mum says it's locked for a reason." Her tone was so matter-of-fact that I laughed a little, thinking it was just one of those grown-up rules. But then Henry looked up and said softly, "The last babysitter went upstairs." His fork clinked against the plate, and I swear he went pale. I tried not to make it awkward. "And what happened to her?" I asked, half joking. He didn't answer. Lily started humming a slow, tuneless melody, and Henry whispered, "She didn't come back." I brushed it off because kids can be weirdly dramatic, but something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Still, I stuck to the list, cleaned up, played a short board game, and got them ready for bed. When I tucked them in, Henry asked, "Will you check the door tonight?" I thought he meant the front one, so I said, "Of course." But he shook his head. "No, the door upstairs." That stopped me. "I thought it was locked?" I asked. Lily pulled the blanket up to her chin and whispered, "It isn't always." After they fell asleep, I sat in the living room, reading one of their picture books. Around 9, I heard a faint creak above me, like footsteps. My first thought was Caroline, maybe she came home early. But when I looked out, her car wasn't in the driveway. Another creak followed, slower this time, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. The kids' room was directly beneath that hallway. My pulse started to race. I tiptoed upstairs, mostly to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. The hallway smelled like dust and something faintly metallic. The door at the far end was shut, painted white but chipped near the knob, as if someone had tried to pry it open. The air up there felt heavy, damp. I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily. Unlocked. Inside was a small room with a single chair facing a mirror. The glass was fractured, not broken, just spiderweb cracks radiating from the center. On the floor were stacks of old papers, all handwritten. I picked one up. The first line said, "Patient, 14 female, delusional episodes, insists she is a caretaker." My breath caught. The handwriting matched Caroline's neat script from the list she gave me. I kept reading. Allowed access to ward children for therapy sessions. Removed in 1972 after incident details sealed. A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. Then, quietly, a voice said, "You weren't supposed to read that." I turned around. Caroline was standing in the doorway, still in her green cardigan, smiling, but something in her expression was wrong. Her eyes were wider, her face tighter, like her skin didn't quite fit her. "You're early," I managed to say, forcing a nervous laugh. "I thought you'd be back at 10. She stepped closer. "I came back because I forgot something." Her eyes flicked to the mirror. They always forget something. I couldn't breathe. "Where are Henry and Lily?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "They're asleep. You tucked them in so nicely. You remind me of Nurse Evelyn." She tucked me in too. Her tone changed flat, detached. "Do you know what they did to us there? They locked the nice ones away." It clicked then, the psychiatric ward from the papers. "You worked there?" I asked, backing away. Her lips twitched. "No, dear. I lived there." I darted past her and ran downstairs. The living room was empty. The couch, the toys, even the dishes I'd washed, all gone, like the house had reset itself. I rushed to the children's room, flung the door open, empty beds, no blankets, no toys, just 2 small indents on the carpet where beds should have been. "Caroline!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Where are the kids?" From the top of the stairs, her voice floated down, calm and chilling. "They're mine now. They always were." I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The lock twisted freely, but the latch wouldn't release. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. I tried the windows nailed shut. The sound of soft footsteps moved down the stairs. "Please," I said, my voice trembling, "let me go." "You're the last one they sent," she whispered. "They keep sending new faces, but I remember all of you, the nurses, the watchers, the liars." I pressed my back against the wall as she came closer. Her hands were shaking, her breath uneven. "You don't understand," I said. "I'm just here to babysit." She smiled faintly. "That's what they all say." Then she lunged. I shoved her aside and sprinted into the kitchen. The back door had an old latch. I kicked it until the wood splintered and ran outside barefoot, cutting my foot on the gravel. I didn't stop running, not until I reached the main road. A passing driver stopped when they saw me waving frantically. I told them everything, maybe too fast, maybe incoherently, but they drove me straight to the police station. By the time officers reached the house, it was empty. No furniture, no photographs, no signs of children, just bare floors and a thick layer of dust. One officer looked at me like I was insane. "That property's been vacant for years," he said. "It used to be staff housing for the hospital across the lake, closed in '72. I insisted I'd been there hours. I described Caroline, the children, the room upstairs. They found no recent footprints, no signs of anyone living there. But then, in the upstairs room, they found the chair, the mirror, and the papers. On the back of one was my name, Emma Lee, written neatly in blue ink. I remember my throat tightening as they showed it to me. I'd never been there before that night, never met that woman before she called. They traced the number she used. It was disconnected, registered to a patient record from 1972. Caroline Parker, age 32, deceased. Cause of death: self-inflicted, inside Lakeview Psychiatric Hospital. They told me she'd been part of a children's rehabilitation program before her breakdown. She believed the staff were harming the kids, so she freed them, took 3 children during a storm, and vanished into the woods. None of them were found. That's when the hospital closed. I tried to convince myself that what I saw was some elaborate delusion, maybe a cruel prank. But a week later, I got a call at my flat from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, no one spoke, just faint breathing. Then a child's voice whispered, "Miss Emma, can you tuck us in again?" I hung up immediately, but the phone rang again the next night. I unplugged it. For months, I couldn't sleep without lights on. I transferred colleges, moved away, stopped babysitting. I thought distance would make it fade. But 10 years later, when my first child was born, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small stuffed rabbit, old and worn, with a note pinned to it, for Lily. I didn't name my daughter Lily. No one knew that name except the police and me. My husband tried to rationalize it, a mix-up, a cruel coincidence, but the handwriting on the note was identical to Caroline's. I filed another police report. They took the toy, ran prints, checked the sender's origin. Nothing. Every few years, someone else in Rotorua swears they got a call from a Caroline Parker offering babysitting work. Each time, the address she gives is different. Each time, the caller's voice matches the same calm, polite tone. The police can never trace it. I've stopped answering unknown numbers. I keep my doors bolted at night. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and my daughter's asleep, I hear soft footsteps upstairs where no one should be. Once, I found her humming that same tuneless melody I heard from Lily. When I asked her where she learned it, she said, "The nice lady sang it while she fixed my blanket." I wanted to believe she was dreaming. I checked her window locked. I checked the closet empty. But on her nightstand was a folded piece of paper I hadn't seen before. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were the words, "You were right to leave that night, but not everyone leaves." I burned it immediately. Still, some nights, I can't help but think about those children, if they ever really existed, or if Caroline just created them to fill the silence she was left with after the hospital closed. Maybe that's what madness does. It doesn't die when you do. It finds someone to keep it alive. I don't babysit anymore. I don't even let my daughter have sleepovers. But every so often, when the phone rings late at night and the line stays silent, I think about that house on Mackenzie Street. And I swear, just before the call ends, I can still hear a faint voice saying, "She didn't come back." Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. The first time I saw one of his paintings, I thought it was a photograph. It hung in the corner of a small cafe near the river in Ghent, right above the counter where the owner kept old postcards. A young woman stared out from the canvas, auburn hair, faint freckles, a look of calm sadness in her eyes. There was something intimate about it, like the painter had known her in a way that went beyond surface detail. I remember staring for almost 10 minutes before the cafe owner, Peter, told me, "He paints the missing ones." I asked what he meant, and he said, "That's Claire Dupont. Disappeared in 2001. The painter, Elias Vermeer, made that portrait for her family." I was a freelance journalist at the time, mostly covering local culture pieces, art exhibitions, music festivals, the kind of filler stories that barely paid rent. Ghent wasn't a big city, but it had character. Canals that glowed at night, narrow alleys where murals told more truth than the newspapers. When I heard about Elias, I thought I'd found a human story worth writing an artist giving families a way to remember. So I called the cafe owner a week later, got Elias's number, and arranged to meet him in his studio. His building was an old textile warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind with tall windows and the smell of dust trapped in the walls. When he opened the door, I immediately noticed his hands stained with color, shaking slightly, as if he hadn't slept much. "You're the journalist?" he asked. I nodded. His voice was soft but precise, like someone constantly measuring his words. He invited me in, and I swear the air inside was heavier than outside, thick with turpentine and something metallic I couldn't place. There were at least 20 paintings stacked against the walls. Each was a face. Women, men, children, every one of them missing. Some I recognized from old posters around town. But these weren't just likenesses. Elias captured expressions that felt alive: fear, longing, resignation. It made me uncomfortable, as if the eyes could see me back. I asked where he got his references. He smiled faintly and said, "I see them, in dreams sometimes. Other times, I just know." I thought it was a metaphor, the kind of artistic nonsense people say when they don't want to explain technique. Still, there was something magnetic about him. I spent the afternoon listening to him talk about emotion, loss, and the silence between memory and death. He said painting helped him give the lost a final truth. I left the studio uneasy but intrigued, certain I had a powerful story. That night, I began drafting the article, describing Elias as a visionary who turned tragedy into art. Before publishing, I wanted quotes from the families of the people he'd painted. That's when the first strange thing happened. The mother of Claire Dupont told me she'd never met Elias. "We never commissioned that portrait," she said. "We didn't even know about it until the cafe owner showed us." I asked if she liked it. She hesitated, then said, "He painted her wearing a necklace only I knew about. It was a silver heart she got on her 17th birthday. We never released photos of it. How could he know?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe he'd seen a private photo? Maybe she'd posted something online? It was 2003. The internet wasn't what it is now, but things still leaked. Still, something about her voice stuck with me. She didn't sound impressed. She sounded frightened. The next day, I called Elias to ask if he ever met the Dupont family. There was a pause. Then he said, "No, but I feel them through the faces. Sometimes, when the painting is almost done, they whisper what I missed." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile. "Do you believe," he continued, "that faces remember what happens to them even after death?" I didn't know how to respond. I said I'd drop by again for follow-up notes. He said, "Come at night, that's when they show themselves." Against my better judgment, I went. The warehouse looked different after dark, colder somehow. Inside, only a single lamp lit the room. Elias was already painting, his movements quick and controlled. On the easel was a half-finished portrait of a man, young, dark hair, bruises around his neck. The expression was terrifyingly real, the eyes frozen mid-scream. "Who is that?" I asked quietly. Elias didn't answer. He kept painting until he dropped the brush and stepped back, trembling. "He was found last night," he finally said. "A construction worker. They'll release his name tomorrow." I thought he meant he'd heard it on the radio, but the next morning, the paper reported a body discovered in a ditch near the ring road. Male, dark hair, strangled. The photograph looked exactly like the painting, down to the mark on his temple. That's when I stopped treating Elias like a harmless eccentric. I went back to his studio, pretending it was for more interviews, but I was there to watch, to see how he worked. He seemed worse than before, pale, jittery, talking to himself between brushstrokes. There was a small black notebook beside him filled with names, dates, and sketches. Some had the word "complete" written next to them. Others said, "unfinished." I asked how he chose his subjects. "They come to me," he murmured. "When they're ready," I pressed him. "Do they talk to you?" "How?" He looked up at me and said, "Through the skin, through the blood that remembers." He laughed afterward, but it didn't sound like humor. It sounded like release. I told him I needed a break, left the studio, and walked home shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing those painted eyes, the way they seemed to follow me. Around 3 a.m., I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I heard nothing, just faint, rhythmic breathing. Then a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have written about me." I froze. I hadn't published the article yet. No one outside Elias and 2 families even knew I was investigating. The next morning, I went straight to the police. I told them about the coincidence between the paintings and the victims. They seemed polite but skeptical. "Artists have imagination," the detective said. "Coincidences happen." But when I showed them photos of the paintings, his tone changed. He asked for Elias's address. A week passed before I heard anything. Then one night, I saw flashing lights near the river. News spread quickly. Elias Vermeer had been arrested after authorities found human remains buried in his garden. They said there were 5 victims, maybe more. His brushes were soaked in something that wasn't just paint. The investigation confirmed what I feared. The faces in his portraits were his own victims. He'd stalked them, abducted them, killed them, and then painted them while their memories were still fresh in his mind. "That's how he got the details," one officer told me later. "He didn't imagine them," he remembered. "I should have stopped there. I should have let the story die with him. But curiosity is its own sickness." After his arrest, I visited his studio one last time before it was sealed. The air inside was suffocating, the canvases now covered in white sheets. I lifted one, and beneath it was a painting I hadn't seen before, a man sitting at a desk, holding a notepad, eyes wide in fear. My notepad, my face, my clothes. I dropped the sheet and stumbled back. The signature at the bottom was dated 3 days before his arrest. I told myself he must have painted it from memory. Maybe he'd taken a photo of me during one of our interviews. But when I looked closer, there was a detail that made no sense behind my shoulder. Painted faintly was a window. reflecting someone else. A dark figure standing in the street, looking up at me. I didn't mention that part in my article. The story was published under the title, The Artist of the Lost. It made national headlines. Everyone wanted to know how no one noticed sooner. The families called me brave for exposing him, but the truth is, I didn't expose him. He let himself be found. Months later, after the trial, I visited the museum where they displayed his surviving work. Most of it had been destroyed, but a few pieces were kept for evidence. They were behind glass now, sanitized, stripped of meaning. Yet even under bright light, the eyes still looked alive. I stood there staring, wondering if anyone else saw the faint shifts in expression, the tiny movements in the pupils. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. On the back of one of the canvases, faint pencil marks formed a list of initials, and one of them matched mine. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe he'd just listed interviewees or buyers, but the others, I recognized. They belonged to his victims. I left the museum immediately, heart pounding, and told myself to forget it. But you can't forget something like that. Not when you wake up at night feeling someone standing by your bed. Not when you hear the faint scratching of brushes even though you live alone. A year after his death, he hung himself in prison, using a strip of his bedsheet. I received a package without a return address. Inside was a rolled canvas, unsigned. I thought it was a prank until I unwrapped it. It was a painting of me again, but older, with deeper lines on my face, the exact way I looked now. Behind me was a dark room, and in the corner, a shape barely visible, a man holding a brush, smiling faintly. I took it to the police. They told me it was probably made years ago, maybe found among his things. But there was fresh paint under the varnish, the scent, unmistakable. Someone had finished it, recently. For weeks, I couldn't focus. Every reflection, every shadow near my apartment window felt like it was watching. I covered mirrors, stopped answering calls. I even considered leaving Ghent altogether, but then I'd be running from a ghost I wasn't sure existed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was unfinished, that Elias hadn't completed whatever he started. Last winter, I finally decided to move. While packing, I found the notebook I'd kept during my interviews with him. On the last page, in handwriting that wasn't mine, was a sentence. "All faces are portraits, even yours." I burned the notebook, but even now, sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see him standing behind the easel, brush in hand, watching me with that patient, knowing stare. I tell myself it's guilt, that I missed what was right in front of me, that he was sick and I was blind. But then I think about the painting in the package, the fresh paint, the impossible details, the way the background looked exactly like my living room. A few nights ago, I heard a faint knock at the door. When I opened it, no one was there. But leaning against the wall was a new canvas, face down. I haven't turned it over yet. I don't want to see what's on it. Because if I do, and it's my face again this time, with my eyes closed, I don't think I'll ever open them again. I first noticed her when the hallway smelled like bleach. Not the usual faint whiff of detergent from the laundry rooms. This was sharper, more deliberate, like someone had scrubbed away something that shouldn't have been there. My apartment in Malmö wasn't fancy, just a narrow space on the 5th floor of a converted factory, mostly occupied by students and quiet loners like me. I worked nights at a print shop and liked the silence of the building, until she moved in across the hall. Her name, according to the mail slot, was Elina Wallström. I never saw her move in one day. The door was bare. The next day, a brass nameplate appeared, polished enough to reflect the hallway lights. She kept to herself, never said hello, never smiled. But sometimes, when I came home after midnight, I'd catch a faint vibration under my feet. like a subwoofer buried somewhere in her flat. Not music, exactly, more like a hum that lasted too long. At first, I didn't care. Everyone has their quirks. I just moved on, put on headphones, ignored it. But after a week, the noises changed. The hum became irregular. There were faint thuds, soft, then sudden, like a chair scraping or someone collapsing. Once, I thought I heard a muffled voice, but it was so faint I couldn't be sure. The building's walls were thick. We all joked you could scream and no one would hear. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I found her standing outside her door. It startled me because she was facing it, not unlocking it, just staring. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and cropped black hair. She wore heavy headphones around her neck, and when she turned, her eyes didn't meet mine right away. They sort of drifted toward me, like it took her a second to decide whether I was real. "Morning," I said awkwardly. Her lips moved before her voice came out. "You heard something last night?" "No, nothing," I lied. She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, then smiled faintly. "Good. The walls are solid." I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled goodbye and left. But that short exchange stuck with me the entire day. There was something rehearsed in her tone, like she'd been waiting to ask that exact question. Over the next month, she became part of the building's rhythm. She never joined the group chats or tenants' meetings, but everyone knew of her. People said she worked from home as a researcher. No one knew in what field. Packages arrived often, long rectangular boxes with fragile labels, some from medical suppliers. Once, I passed the courier at the door and saw a crate labeled acoustic panels. That made sense, considering the hums I kept hearing. Soundproofing, maybe. Then the smell came back. Not bleach this time, but something metallic like iron mixed with disinfectant. It seeped from under her door in thin, ghostly waves. I knocked, half out of concern, half curiosity. She opened after several seconds, just enough to show one eye and a strip of her pale cheek. "Yes? Sorry," I said. "Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. There's kind of a smell." Her gaze sharpened, and for the first time I noticed her pupils were slightly dilated. "You shouldn't worry about smells. Old pipes, maybe. It's stronger near your door," I said carefully. "Then stay away from my door." She shut it, firmly but not loudly. The soundproofing was so good that the click of her lock was the last thing I heard. After that, I started noticing the building's water pressure fluctuating. Sometimes my shower would turn lukewarm for minutes. Sometimes the tap would sputter. The maintenance guy blamed the old plumbing. But one evening, when I went down to the laundry room, I found reddish water pooling near the drain. It wasn't dark like rust, it was fresh, diluted red. I took a photo before it vanished into the grating. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway felt loaded. Around 3 a.m., I stepped outside my apartment, barefoot, holding my phone light low. The corridor was silent except for the distant hum, low and steady, pulsing from behind her door. I crouched and pressed my ear to the floor. I swear I heard breathing, slow, labored, not hers. The next day, I told myself I was overreacting. I'd been working too much, barely sleeping, but when I left for work that evening, I saw her again. She was dragging a heavy trash bag toward the service lift, her movements calm and methodical. The bag scraped the floor, leaving a faint, wet streak. "Hey, you need help with that?" I asked without thinking. She froze mid-step, then turned her head slowly. "No, it's only soundproofing foam," she said, but I saw it then her wrist. There were faint bruises shaped like finger marks, old ones, faded to yellow. 2 days later, the landlord announced that the building's water tanks needed cleaning. Tenants complained about discoloration in the water. The maintenance crew drained the system that morning. Around noon, I came home early, just in time to see two workers whispering near the basement stairwell. One of them was pale, shaking his head. "What's going on?" I asked. He muttered, "Just something stuck in one of the drainage pipes." They shut the basement door soon after. By evening, a faint odor filled the halls again, stronger now, sour and metallic. I tried calling the landlord, but he said it was being handled. That night, I locked every window and stayed on the couch, too uneasy to sleep in my bed. Around midnight, the building lights flickered, and I heard its footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the hall. I peeked through the peephole and saw her standing outside my door, head tilted slightly. She was listening. I didn't breathe. The footsteps paused. Then, faintly, she whispered, "You lied." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then walked back across the hall, her bare feet silent against the floor. The next morning, I found a small note slipped under my door. It said, in neat handwriting, "Noise invites attention." I stopped sleeping properly after that. Every time I dozed off, I'd dream of muffled cries and red water swirling down drains. I even considered moving out, but I couldn't afford it, so I started recording the sounds. Every night, I'd leave my phone by the door with a voice memo running. Most nights, it caught nothing but static, but one captured something unmistakable. At 2:43 a.m., a faint scream, distant but human. Then the hum started again. I played it over and over. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was in there. I went to the police. They took my statement, but when I played the audio, they looked unimpressed. "Could be from the street," one officer said. "Could be a television. No one watches TV at that volume in a soundproofed apartment," I said, my voice cracking. They promised to check in, but I knew they wouldn't. She was careful, too careful. And after I came back home, there was another note waiting for me. "You shouldn't have done that." That same evening, she knocked on my door for the first time. When I opened, she stood calmly, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said. "What is it?" "Earplugs. You said you were hearing things." I stared at her. "You're mocking me now?" Her expression didn't change. "You want silence, don't you? Everyone does." "I don't want silence," I said quietly. "I want peace." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Sadness, maybe, or rage held too long. Then she turned and walked back into her flat, the door closing with a dull thud. That night, I packed a small bag. I decided I'd stay with a coworker for a few days. But as I was zipping it shut, the building's fire alarm went off, a shrill, mechanical scream that made me jump. I ran into the hall. Smoke was drifting from under her door. "Fire!" someone yelled from the stairwell. I ran to her apartment and pounded on the door. "Alina, open up!" No answer. The smoke smelled wrong, acrid but chemical, not burning wood or fabric. I kicked the door. It cracked open into a wall of heat and mist. I covered my nose and stepped inside. Her living room was a maze of acoustic panels, wires, and strange equipment tanks, tubing, a metal table under harsh fluorescent light. The air was wet and heavy. Then I saw it, a large steel drum in the corner, water bubbling faintly at the surface. The red I'd seen before wasn't rust. "Alina!" I shouted again, coughing. She appeared from the other room, calm as ever, her face glistening with sweat. "You shouldn't be here." "What the hell is this?" I yelled. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She walked toward me, holding something behind her back. I backed away, my pulse hammering. "They laughed," she said softly. "They thought I was pretending." "You think so too, don't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Her eyes flashed. "They called me it." I realized then what was behind her back. a long surgical knife, thin and glinting. I stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments. Metal clattered to the floor. "Alina, stop," I said. "You don't have to." She lunged. I ducked, grabbing the nearest thing, a lamp, and swung it. It shattered against her shoulder, but she barely flinched. The room pulsed with the hum again, louder this time. My ears rang as I bolted toward the door. She grabbed my arm, nails digging in deep. "You'll hear it too," she hissed. I twisted free and ran into the hall, choking on smoke. Neighbors were shouting, alarms wailing. I sprinted down the stairs, 2 at a time. Behind me, I heard one last sound, not a scream, but a sudden silence, like a vacuum swallowing everything. The fire brigade arrived minutes later. They evacuated the building and doused the smoke, but by morning, the headlines were everywhere. Apartment fire in Malmö, 1 tenant missing, 1 hospitalized. They never found her body. The investigators said the heat had warped parts of the floor and the water tanks had burst. But I knew she was gone long before the fire trucks came. Her apartment, when I returned weeks later to collect my things, had been stripped bare. No panels, no wires, nothing left but a faint mark on the floor where the steel drum had stood. I moved across town into a newer building with bright corridors and neighbors who smiled, but silence, it follows me. At night, when I turn on the tap, sometimes the water comes out with a faint tint, almost imperceptible. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I hear that low hum beneath the floorboards again, steady, patient, waiting. I told you this because you asked why I don't listen to music anymore. The truth is, I can't stand silence either. Both sound and its absence remind me of her, the woman who built a room without sound, who wanted to erase the noise of her pain. And in doing so, she found a way to make everyone else finally listen. I remember the first time I heard the wolves that night. It wasn't the usual echoing howl across the ridge. It was closer, sharp, almost questioning. I froze mid-step, my boots sinking into the crust of snow outside the ranger cabin. The tourists behind me went silent, and I could feel their excitement shift into unease. It was my job to calm them, to play the part of the confident wildlife ranger who knew every trail, every sound, every shadow in Jasper's backcountry. "They're just calling to each other," I told them, though the hairs on my arms told me otherwise. "Means they're close. We're lucky tonight. There were 7 of us in total. 2 couples, a father and his teenage son, and me, the guide they'd trusted for the Midnight Wolf Tour, a program I'd started that year to attract off-season visitors. It was supposed to be safe. I'd been doing this for over a decade, leading tours through the same routes, logging animal sightings, ensuring no one got hurt. But that winter felt different. The wolves were restless, venturing closer to human settlements. Some locals claimed they'd been finding carcasses, deer, elk, even dogs torn apart near the outskirts. I never told the tourists that. Fear ruins business. We reached the ridge where the forest opened slightly, giving a view of the frozen lake below. The moonlight barely reached us through the clouds. I told them to stay close while I unpacked the bait, a few slabs of raw meat from the cooler. The same routine I'd done countless times. The wolves had grown to recognize the sound of my calls, my voice. They trusted me. I'd spent months observing them, learning their signals, their hierarchy, their habits. And maybe that's where I started to lose perspective, the line between feeding them for research and feeding them because I wanted to see them, needed to see them. When I whistled the 3rd time, I heard it, the crunch of paws on frozen ground, the low growl of anticipation. Then came the eyes. A dozen, gleaming amber dots in the dark, moving in synchrony, circling just beyond the tree line. The tourists gasped softly, clutching their flashlights. "Don't move," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They're assessing us." I could feel their fear mixing with awe. That was always the moment I lived for, when people realized nature didn't care about them. But this time, something was wrong. One of the wolves stepped forward, dragging something across the snow. It wasn't a deer. Even from a distance, I recognized the shape of boot, attached to a leg. The tourists didn't understand at first. They whispered, thinking it was part of the show. My stomach clenched. I took a step back. The wolves dropped the leg and scattered, blending into the trees. The silence that followed was unbearable. The teenage boy's flashlight trembled as he raised it toward the object, and when the light hit it fully, his father's voice cracked. "Oh my God, I cut him off. We're leaving, now." My voice came out harsher than I meant, but panic had already spread. One of the women began sobbing, and her husband tried to steady her, tripping over his own boots. The snow felt deeper than before, pulling us down as we moved. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain the wolves hadn't left just watching. They didn't usually behave that way. Wolves don't drag parts of kills, they consume everything. This was deliberate. A message. Back at the ranger cabin, I locked the door and radioed dispatch, reporting what I'd seen. They told me to stay put until morning, to keep everyone inside. The tourists huddled near the heater, whispering accusations, some toward me. I didn't blame them. I was the one who'd brought them out there. But deep down, something else gnawed at me. I recognized the boot. It was government issued, same as mine. When dawn broke, a team from Parks, Canada arrived with local police. They found what was left of the body, another ranger named Colin, a man I'd trained years ago. They ruled it an animal attack, though even the lead investigator admitted the body didn't look like a typical wolf kill. The bones were too clean, the flesh too selectively removed. And that wasn't the worst part. Colin had been missing for nearly a week. But the night before, I'd found a note on my desk unsigned reminding me to feed them well tonight. I'd assumed it was from one of the rangers. Now, I wasn't so sure. The tourists were escorted back to town. I stayed behind, assisting with the search. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching from the woods. I told myself it was paranoia, but one evening, while checking the Bay Area alone, I saw fresh footprints beside mine, human ones, leading deeper into the forest. I followed them for a while, careful and quiet, until I saw movement ahead. A man, standing perfectly still among the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same uniform as mine, though his looked older, faded. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something behind me. I turned for a second, nothing but snow and silence. When I looked back, he was gone. Only his footprints remained, but they ended abruptly, as if he'd vanished mid-step. I returned to the cabin shaken, my pulse racing. On the table, beside my logbook, lay a piece of folded paper. I hadn't left it there. Inside was a list of names, all the people who'd gone missing in the area over the past 5 years. Every name had a date beside it, except mine. I started sleeping in short bursts, waking to phantom howls. Some nights I'd catch movement outside, shapes darting between the trees. Once, I found fresh meat hanging from the branch near the cabin, as though someone had left an offering. I reported everything, but the park officials dismissed it as stress. Colin's death, they said, had gotten to me. Maybe they were right. But then, I found the journal. It wasn't mine, though it was tucked beneath my bed, wrapped in plastic. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Each entry described a feeding, names, locations, the wolves' behavior afterward. The first date was from 1974, long before I started working here. I flipped through the pages in disbelief. until I saw my own handwriting near the endnotes I didn't remember writing, dated just a week earlier. "They trust me," one entry read. "They deserve more." I dropped the book like it burned. The next morning, I confronted the park supervisor. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You've been alone too long out here," he said. "Take some time off." He confiscated the journal and promised to file it. A week later, I called to check on the investigation. They told me no such journal was ever turned in. That's when I realized I couldn't leave. If I walked away, no one would ever know what really happened to Colin or the others. I started reviewing my old logs, cross-checking dates of wolf sightings with missing persons reports. The pattern was undeniable. Every disappearance coincided with one of my tours. At first, I thought someone was framing me, but when I revisited my storage shed, I found proof I couldn't explain: sealed coolers filled with meat, labeled with numbers, not names. I didn't remember buying them, but the handwriting on the labels matched mine perfectly. That night, I decided to end the tours for good. I wrote an official report naming every inconsistency, every strange occurrence. But before I could send it, there was a knock on the cabin door, soft, deliberate. When I opened it, no one was there, just another folded note stuck to the doorframe. It read, "They know you stopped feeding." I didn't sleep after that. Every sound outside made my chest tighten. Around 3 a.m., the howling began, not distant this time, but right outside the window. I peered through the glass and saw them. A pack of wolves sitting in the clearing, motionless, staring directly at the cabin. In the center stood the same man I'd seen before, the one in the faded uniform. He raised his hand and pointed at me, then turned toward the forest. The wolves followed. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, against every instinct, and went after them. I couldn't explain why, maybe guilt, maybe madness. The forest swallowed me fast, the trees closing in. The footprints ahead glowed faintly in the snow, illuminated by the moon. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing I didn't recognize. There was a pit in the center, surrounded by bones. Not animal bones, human ones, dozens of them, stacked in careful order. A rustling behind me made me spin around. The man in the uniform stepped out from the trees, calm as ever. I raised my rifle, shouting, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, and for a moment, his face looked like mine. "They were hungry," he said, his voice low and measured. "You taught them to trust you. You made them depend on you. And then you stopped." My hands shook. I started, but he cut me off. "You don't remember because you didn't want to. But you fed them. You watched. You wrote everything down. They were yours long before I came." He stepped closer, and the wolves emerged behind him, silent, their eyes fixed on me. I backed away until I hit the pit's edge. The next thing I remember is waking up at dawn, lying beside the pit, my rifle gone. The man and the wolves had vanished. I stumbled back to the cabin, numb and disoriented. On the table, my missing journal was back open to a new page. My handwriting again, though I hadn't written it. It said, "You fed them last night. They're satisfied." For now, I left Jasper the next day, resigned my position, packed my things, and moved to the city. For months, I tried to convince myself it was all a breakdown, a mind twisted by isolation. But last winter, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a roll of film, undeveloped. Curiosity got the better of me. When I had it processed, the photos were all the same me, standing in the snow, holding raw meat, surrounded by wolves. And behind me, faint but visible, was the man in the faded uniform. They reopened the Midnight Wolf Tour this year, led by a new ranger. I saw his name in a brochure, Daniel R. Hayes. That's my name. I haven't worked there in over 40 years. I don't know who he is or what's real anymore. But sometimes, when the wind howls at night, I swear I can hear them, those familiar voices in the dark, calling me back to feed them again. He was sitting at the low table when I first met him, his hands moving over a sheet of wet pulp like a surgeon tracing the edges of life itself. "Paper breathes," he told me without looking up. "That's why it outlives us." I remember thinking it was such a poetic thing to say for someone who lived alone in a damp workshop on the outskirts of Kyoto. I was 25 then, working on my graduate thesis about traditional washi making, and I thought I'd found the perfect subject in him, an old craftsman named Mr. Sato, whose work was whispered about in art circles but rarely seen. I didn't know that within a month I'd come to regret ever stepping foot inside that house. He lived near the river, past a stretch of willow trees that almost hid the path to his workshop. From the outside, it looked like any other papermaker's studio, buckets of pulp, bamboo screens, wooden vats, but there was an odd, acrid sweetness in the air, like overripe fruit left to rot. I asked him about it once, and he smiled, saying, "Old methods. You wouldn't understand." I didn't push it. I was too eager to document his technique, his rhythm, the way his hands shaped what looked like clouds into sheets, thinner than a butterfly's wing. He let me stay for a week, observing his process. I slept in a tiny tatami room above the workshop, where the smell of wet fiber and smoke clung to the futon. At night, I'd hear him working soft splashes, the steady scrape of wood against bamboo. I thought it was dedication, that kind of relentless craft. But sometimes, just before dawn, I'd wake to something heavier, the sound of a body dragging across the floor. And once, what I swore was a muffled cry. When I asked about it in the morning, he laughed, tapping his ear. "The house is old. It talks sometimes." By the third night, I stopped sleeping. My nerves twitched at every sound. I remember writing in my notebook, "He never leaves the workshop after dark. The door stays locked, but someone moves around outside." I tried to convince myself it was the wind. I even went down one night with a flashlight, only to find the paper screens quivering slightly, as though someone had brushed past them seconds earlier. On the fifth day, he invited me to help with pulping. The mixture in the vat looked like oatmeal, thick and white, but it smelled faintly metallic. "Kozo fiber," he said when I wrinkled my nose. "The river blesses it." He scooped some out with his bare hands and let it drip between his fingers. The skin on his palms was pale and waxy, like it had soaked too long. When I dipped my own hands in, I noticed a small reddish streak floating in the pulp. "Rust from the vat," he explained quickly, turning away. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen that color before, not rust, but blood diluted in water. I tried to reason it out. Traditional vats used old iron tools. Discoloration wasn't uncommon. Still, my mind kept circling back to the locked basement door I'd noticed on my first day. I had assumed it was storage, but the more I heard those dragging sounds, the more that door began to occupy my thoughts. On my last morning, he surprised me with a gift, a bound notebook made of his newest washi. The pages were astonishingly thin, almost translucent. "You'll write your truths on these," he said, placing it in my hands. "It'll remember them." I thanked him, touched by the gesture, but something about his words unsettled me. That night, after I returned to my apartment, I couldn't stop running my fingers over the pages. The texture was smooth, but strangely warm, like skin just moments after death. For months afterward, I couldn't forget that smell or that texture. I finished my thesis, published my paper, and even cited him as a master craftsman preserving ancient traditions. My advisor praised my work, and Mr. Sato sent me a brief note of congratulations, written on that same uncanny paper. I told myself the unease was just guilt, academic exploitation of an old man's solitude. I forced myself to move on. Then, 2 years later, I saw his name again. A Kyoto newspaper ran a small piece about a discovery in a riverside workshop: human remains found sealed within handmade paper scrolls. My stomach dropped when I saw the photo. The beams, the buckets, the faint outline of the same low table I had sat beside it was all his. I spent the next 3 days in denial, rereading the article until the words blurred. The police had confirmed DNA from at least 6 missing people. No one had seen Sato since the investigation began. I should have left it there, but curiosity, guilt, whatever it was, it pulled me back. I went to the address under the pretense of doing follow-up research. The workshop had been cordoned off, but a local officer let me peek through the slats. The vats were empty, but the smell lingered, the same sour sweetness. On one wall, I noticed sheets of paper hanging like drying laundry, faintly brown at the edges. Something about their uneven color made my skin crawl. That night, in my hotel room, I pulled out the notebook he'd given me years ago. I hadn't opened it since. My fingers trembled as I turned a page toward the light. There were faint patterns beneath the surface whorls, almost like fingerprints. My chest tightened. I ran my thumb across the margin and felt something raised, almost like a healed scar. I held it closer to the lamp, and I swear I saw tiny pores. I threw it across the room. I didn't sleep. I sat there until morning, replaying every sound from that week: the dragging, the cries, the metallic smell. I needed proof. I couldn't just live with that possibility gnawing at me. So I brought the notebook to a university friend who worked in forensics. I told him it was an old artifact I'd found during research. He agreed to test a sample. When he called me 3 days later, his voice was tight. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I tried to sound casual, but he interrupted. "It's not animal fiber. It's human." He wouldn't elaborate. Said he didn't want his name anywhere near it. He mailed the notebook back to me with the sample corner sealed in plastic, tagged, "Dermal tissue fragments, human origin." I sat there for an hour just staring at it. Part of me wanted to burn the notebook immediately, but another part, the same reckless curiosity that made me follow him in the first place, needed to understand. I flipped through every page again, noticing now the faint reddish tint in some, the slight variations of tone, as if each page came from a different body. And then, on the very last sheet, near the spine, I found something written so faintly I almost missed it. Under the light, it appeared, "To preserve a soul, one must bind it to memory." It was his handwriting. That line burned into me. I tried to dismiss it as madness, but something inside me shifted. I started dreaming of the workshop again, the dripping vats, the sweet, suffocating smell. Sometimes, in those dreams, the paper moved, fluttering like lungs taking a shallow breath. I stopped teaching. I stopped seeing friends. I couldn't concentrate on anything but that notebook. One night, desperate for sleep, I placed it inside my closet and locked the door. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint rustling sound. It was coming from inside the closet. I sat there, heart pounding, listening. The noise stopped when I moved. I convinced myself it was just air circulation, nerves, stress. But the next morning, I found the closet door slightly ajar, the notebook open on the floor. The page I had left blank now had something scrawled across it. "I remember you. I didn't tell anyone." Who would believe me? I packed it into a sealed container and took it to the university library's archive, pretending it was research material. I left it there under a false accession name and tried to forget. Months passed. I moved to Osaka, started over. But every so often, I'd get a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end never spoke, just soft breathing, steady and wet, like pulp being mixed. I changed phones twice. it didn't stop. 3 years later, I was invited to an exhibition in Tokyo about the lost masters of washi. Out of morbid curiosity, I went. The gallery walls were lined with displays of rare papers from the 18th century to modern times. Near the end, I froze. Behind glass, under dim light, hung a single sheet labeled unattributed, circa 1970 seconds, Kyoto region. I didn't need the label, the texture, the faint pink hue. I knew it. It was his. And beneath it, in tiny script, someone had written, S. Sato Collection, donated anonymously. I stared at it until a curator approached. Beautiful, isn't it? He said. Incredible preservation. The fibers are so fine, almost biological. He smiled. We're planning to test the material soon. My throat went dry. I told him not to. I don't know why. Fear, guilt, superstition, but I practically begged him to leave it alone. He looked confused. It's just paper, he said. What's there to be afraid of? That night, I couldn't stop shaking. If someone tested it, they'd find the same thing. I realized what he'd meant about binding a soul. Maybe each sheet carried something, a memory, a consciousness trapped in fiber, unable to decay. Maybe he believed he was preserving people, not destroying them. I kept thinking of the dragging sounds, the cries, the smell that never went away. A month later, I saw another news article. The Tokyo curator who handled the exhibit had gone missing. The lab where the paper sample was tested burned down that same night. Authorities suspected electrical fault. I didn't. I stopped reading after that. Now, years later, I'm telling you this because I need you to understand why I can't destroy that notebook, even though every instinct tells me to. It's in my apartment still, sealed in a box, inside a box, buried under books. I tried throwing it into the river once, but when I went back the next morning, it was sitting on my doorstep, dry as if it had never touched water. No one saw who left it. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint whisper of paper rustling, even when the air is still. And sometimes, when I dream, I see Mr. Sato at his low table again, hands gliding across a fresh sheet. He looks up at me now, smiling gently. You understand, don't you? He says. Paper breathes. And I wake with the smell of pulp thick in my nose, my palms damp, as if I've been working beside him all night. I don't tell anyone this part, but I think the paper still remembers me. When I run my fingers across the box, I swear it pulses, almost like it's waiting. Maybe he was right. Maybe paper does outlive us. Maybe it keeps more than memory. Maybe it keeps us. It started the day I went back to return a stack of tapes I'd borrowed from Madame Fournier. She was my old vocal coach, small, sharp-eyed, with a presence that could fill a room even in silence. I'd stopped taking lessons months before, after deciding to leave the conservatory. My mother said I should thank her properly, so I brought flowers and the tapes she'd lent me, recordings of old arias and breathing drills. When I reached her house that afternoon, the front door was slightly open. That was strange. Madame was particular about locks. I knocked once, twice. Madame, it's Elise, I called. No answer, just the faint hum of something like static or a reel turning somewhere inside. I hesitated before stepping in. Her house always smelled faintly of tea and varnished wood, but that day the air was different. Warmer, denser, with a strange chemical edge. Madam? I said again, my voice catching a little. The sound came from her studio at the back. I followed it through the narrow hall, past the framed photos of her students, rows of young faces, frozen mid-performance, eyes lifted, mouths open in song. There were dozens of them, almost like a shrine to sound itself. When I reached the studio door, I paused. The hum was louder now, rhythmic. I knocked softly, then pushed it open. The room was dim, except for a desk lamp beside an old tape recorder. Madame Fournier sat in her usual chair, head tilted toward a row of shelves. At first, I thought she was asleep. Then she spoke without turning. "Elise, you came back." Her voice sounded steady, but low, like someone caught mid-thought. I smiled nervously. "Yes, I brought your tapes. I didn't mean to intrude." The door. "You didn't intrude," she said, finally facing me. Her eyes looked heavier, more sunken than before. "I was just organizing. You can set them there." She pointed to the piano. I placed the tapes down and noticed the shelves behind her lined with glass jars, each labeled in her elegant handwriting. Hundreds of them. I hadn't seen those before. Inside each jar was a reel of magnetic tape, neatly coiled, like some strange collection of bottled snakes. "You're archiving your lessons?" I asked. "Preserving," she corrected softly. "Every student leaves something behind, don't they?" She smiled faintly. "Their voice stays with me." That should have sounded poetic, but it didn't. The way she said it, like she meant it, literally made something cold settle in my chest. I stepped closer. Some jars had names I recognized: Sophie L., Mark A., even my own, Elise D. Next to a jar half filled with tape. "You kept these?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Of course, I recorded every exercise, every scale." She turned the knob on the tape recorder and pressed play. A familiar sound filled the room, my own voice, breathing unevenly through a warm-up from months ago. I laughed awkwardly. "God, I sound terrible." She didn't laugh. "You improved quickly," she said, "but your upper register is still shy, I remember." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "Would you like tea?" she asked suddenly. I declined, but she was already moving to the small stove by the window. As she turned her back, I glanced at the shelf again. One jar caught my eye, new, without dust. The label read Camille R. The date below it said the 14th of April 2008, but it was February. I froze. Camille Rousseau was one of Madame's newer students, a soprano a year younger than me. She'd been cast in an upcoming production. We'd talked backstage once, bright, warm girl, full of life. When Madame came back with the tea, I tried to sound light. "Camille's doing well, isn't she?" I heard she got the lead. Madame set the cup down carefully. "Yes," she said. "She's very gifted." I noticed her hands tremble slightly as she spoke. "I'm helping her with her final aria this week. We're recording on Sunday." My throat felt dry. "Sunday?" I repeated. "But you've already labeled her jar." She looked at me, then at the shelf. "Organization helps me focus." Her voice was calm, too calm. "I prepare in advance." I nodded slowly, pretending to accept that. But the unease grew heavier, prickling under my skin. Something about those jars felt wrong, too deliberate, too clinical. I sipped the tea out of politeness, though the taste was bitter, metallic. "You don't have to drink it," she murmured. "It's an old blend. I forget what's in it sometimes." I set the cup down, my heart starting to pound. I made an excuse about needing to leave for choir rehearsal. She smiled faintly and said, "Of course. I'll see you soon." As I walked out, I could feel her eyes on my back the entire way. That night, I couldn't shake it off. The image of those jars kept flashing in my mind, especially Camille's. The date on that label, it felt like a countdown. The next morning, I texted Camille, half jokingly, "Hey, be careful at your lesson. Madame's getting creepier." She didn't reply. I thought nothing of it until 3 days later, when the conservatory bulletin board went up with a notice: "Missing person, Camille Rousseau." I stood there, staring at the paper, my pulse thudding in my ears. She hadn't shown up for rehearsal or classes since Saturday. Her parents had called the police. Everyone assumed she'd run off to Paris with her boyfriend, but I knew better. I could still see that jar, that date, April 14. It was only a few weeks away. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence, but my gut wouldn't let me. So, a week later, I went back. This time I didn't knock. I waited until after dark, when her lights were out, and crept around the back garden. Her curtains were drawn, but a dim orange glow leaked from one window of the studio. I peered through a crack and nearly stopped breathing. Madame was there, standing by the shelves, humming softly to herself as she held one of the jars up to the light. The lid was off. She was threading the tape onto her recorder, eyes closed, smiling as a young woman's voice filled the room. I recognized it instantly. Camille. My hands started shaking. The sound was too clean, too close, like it hadn't come from a rehearsal mic, but something intimate. I pulled back, heart racing, and almost slipped on the gravel. The noise caught her attention. Her head snapped toward the window. I ducked behind a bush, barely daring to breathe. After a long minute, she turned off the recorder and shut the curtains. I waited another 5 before running. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that recording Camille's voice caught mid-breath, as if she'd been interrupted. The next morning, I went to the police. I told them about the jars, the label, the recording. They listened politely, but exchanged those skeptical looks adults to reserve for hysterical young women. "You're saying she, what, keeps recordings?" the officer asked. "That's not a crime, but the date, maybe she mislabeled it." They took my statement and promised to look into it. Days passed. Nothing happened. Madame kept teaching. Camille remained missing. Finally, I decided I couldn't sit still. I had to know. On April 13, the night before the date written on that jar, I returned. I'd stolen my uncle's spare keys. He used to tune Madame's piano, and drove over after midnight. Her lights were off. I let myself in quietly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of a metronome somewhere. I followed it to the studio. The shelves were still there, hundreds of jars gleaming in the dark. I scanned for Camille's name. There it was, dead center. The date had been crossed out and replaced with the 13th of April 2008. Tonight, my heart lurched. I grabbed the jar. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, the tape reel was half-filled, unfinished. As I turned it, something clinked at the bottom. Not tape, metal. A small charm, shaped like a treble clef. I'd seen it before. Camille wore it on her bracelet. My stomach twisted. Then came the sound, a slow creak of floorboards behind me. "Elise," said her voice, calm, level. "You shouldn't be here." I turned, jar still in my hand. She stood in the doorway, wearing a long gray robe, her hair down. Her expression was almost tender. "I told you I'd see you soon," she said. I opened my mouth, but no words came. "You don't understand," she continued, stepping closer. "Every great singer loses their voice one day. I save them before that happens." I backed away, gripping the jar like a weapon. "Where's Camille?" "She's here," Madame said softly. "Safe, eternal." She gestured toward the recorder. "They all are." My flashlight beam caught her face, calm, luminous with conviction. "They trust me," she said. "They want to be remembered exactly as they sounded. Not broken, not forgotten, just preserved." I felt bile rise in my throat. "You killed them," I whispered. "You killed your students." Her lips tightened. "I perfected them," she said. "Their voices will never crack, never fade. Wouldn't you want that, Elise? To never lose what makes you beautiful?" She stepped closer. I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the shelf. Dozens of jars rattled. one crashing to the floor, shattering. The air filled with the faint hiss of unraveling tape. Madame screamed a raw, guttural sound and lunged forward. I swung the flashlight, catching her arm. She staggered but didn't fall. I bolted through the hall, jar clutched against my chest. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, not angrily but pleading, "You'll understand one day." I burst through the front door and ran until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the police station. I don't even remember what I said, just the jar, the charm, the tapes. They raided her house at dawn. What they found made headlines across the region. Inside her basement were 27 jars, each containing a tape reel. Forensic teams discovered microscopic traces of blood and tissue on some reels, enough to confirm they weren't just recordings. She'd mixed human remains with the magnetic tape itself, using chemicals to bind the voice physically to the medium. Camille's bracelet was found in a drawer. Her body was never recovered. Madame Fournier was declared unfit for trial, diagnosed with a severe psychotic disorder. She spent her remaining years in a secure hospital, mostly silent, except for the occasional humming scales, arias, lullabies. She died in 2013. They buried her quietly, no visitors allowed. I still have the jar. The police let me keep it after the case closed, since it was labeled with Camille's name but contained no remains. I don't know why I didn't throw it away. Maybe because I feel responsible because I saw the signs and did nothing soon enough. Sometimes, when the night is very still, I think I hear something faint inside it, like a hum just below silence. I tell myself it's just the glass settling, but deep down, I know what I'm hearing. It's her breathing cut short, caught forever between two notes she never finished singing. I had just settled into my seat when the sound reached me. At first, I thought it was part of the usual racket of the train wheels grinding, luggage shifting in the racks, someone dropping a bottle in the next carriage. But this was different. It came in a rhythm, deliberate, 3 dull knocks, then silence. 3 again, just a little louder, as though someone wanted attention but didn't want everyone to notice. The sound came from the luggage compartment directly across the narrow aisle from where I teat. Saturday I froze, my hand still on the magazine I'd been pretending to read, and leaned forward, listening harder. The train was only half full, mostly quiet commuters and a few students with headphones. No one else seemed to notice. I caught the eye of a woman 2 rows down, but she looked right through me, engrossed in her phone. I pressed my palm lightly against the compartment door. The vibrations were there, faint but real, perfectly timed with each knock. I drew my hand back quickly, like I'd touched something hot. My first thought was that some poor soul had got themselves locked inside by mistake. But how? Those compartments were for oversized baggage, not people. I debated with myself for a good 30 seconds, my chest tightening with every new set of knocks, before standing and stepping into the aisle. I looked up and down the carriage, half expecting someone to laugh or accuse me of tampering, but everyone else carried on as though nothing was happening. I pressed my knuckles against the door. "Hello? Can you hear me?" My voice was low, careful. The reply came instantly, 3 sharp knocks back. My stomach flipped over. I swallowed and tried again. "Are you stuck? Do you need help?" 2 knocks this time, quick and forceful, as if confirming yes. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple, even though it wasn't warm. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I stepped toward the end of the carriage, where a uniformed guard sat checking tickets. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a little too urgent. There's someone in the luggage compartment. You need to unlock it." The guard looked up, unimpressed. "That's not possible, sir. I heard them knocking, repeatedly. They knocked back when I spoke." He frowned, clearly weighing whether I was drunk or making mischief. Those compartments aren't accessible from the outside. Nobody could get in without me noticing. Then explain the knocking, I snapped, a little too loud. Heads turned. The guard sighed, got to his feet, and walked with me back down the carriage. My heart thudded in my throat, but I felt a rush of relief that he'd take me seriously enough to check. We stood before the compartment. I motioned with my hand, urging him to listen. At first, there was nothing, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. But then 3 knocks, hollow and deliberate. The guard's face drained of color. He rattled his keyring, muttered something under his breath, and jammed a key into the lock. The latch clicked, and with a deep breath, he swung the door open. Inside, there was no luggage. The compartment was completely bare, except for a large rectangular mirror bolted flat against the back wall. The mirror caught both our reflections, distorted slightly by the vibration of the train. My throat tightened, because as the guard stepped aside, I realized the reflection wasn't quite right. I leaned in, narrowing my eyes. My reflection stared back at me, but it was delayed. When I tilted my head, it moved half a second later. When I raised my hand, it hovered, hesitated, then lifted its own. The guard cursed under his breath and slammed the door shut. "That's enough. It's empty. Forget it." "Empty," I hissed. "Didn't you see?" "Forget it," he repeated, his face pale and hard. He locked the compartment again, shoved the keys into his belt, and walked quickly back to his seat, refusing to meet my eyes. I sat down, shaking. My reflection in the dark window across from me looked normal, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The mirror hadn't been showing me at the same moment I had been watching myself lag behind. I pressed my palms together, trying to steady my breathing. But then came the sound again. 3 knocks. Louder than before. Passengers stirred now. A young man turned his head, frowning. "What's that?" he asked. No one answered. The knocks grew, faster, insistent, as though whoever was on the other side was furious to be ignored. I jumped to my feet and grabbed the compartment handle. "Open it!" I shouted toward the guard. "They're still in there!" The guard stood but didn't move closer. His face was tight with something that looked too close to fear. "Leave it, sir. Sit down." "I'm not leaving it," I barked. "There's someone." Before I could finish, the knocks erupted into a thunderous pounding, rattling the door in its frame. People screamed. The train lurched. I pulled hard on the handle, but the lock held. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it began. Silence dropped heavy, broken only by the sound of wheels grinding on tracks. My whole body trembled. Then came a final sound, one that froze me where I stood. 3 knocks again, but this time not from inside the compartment. They came from directly behind me. I spun around, but no one was close enough to have made them. Every passenger near me sat rigid, eyes wide, hands clutched tight around armrests or bags. My mouth went dry. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me not to, I turned back to the compartment. The mirror was glowing faintly through the crack in the door, a dull shimmer that pulsed like breath. The guard was shouting now, ordering everyone to stay calm. He hurried toward me, shoved me back into the aisle, and unlocked the door once more. The mirror still sat there, but the reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was me, yes, but not the me, standing there. The figure inside the glass looked worn down, face lined with exhaustion I didn't yet carry. He raised his hand, and his lips formed words I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice breaking. The guard slammed the compartment shut again, relocked it, and turned on me with a fury I hadn't expected. "You didn't see anything, do you understand?" "What do you mean I didn't see anything? That was me. That was... Do you want this train to keep moving?" he snapped. His hands trembled as he gripped his keys. "Then you didn't see anything." I sat down because my legs couldn't hold me. For the next hour, I couldn't take my eyes off that compartment. Passengers whispered, casting nervous glances, but the knocking never came again. The train finally slowed into Dunedin Station, and when the doors opened, people all but ran to get off. I stood, frozen. My reflection in the window opposite me smiled faintly a moment after I did, like it was mocking me, savoring its delay. My stomach lurched. I grabbed my bag, but when I passed the compartment one last time, I swear I felt fingers brushing against the inside of the door, as though urging me to open it. I didn't. I stepped off into the night air, breathing like I'd just surfaced from drowning. The guard avoided my gaze completely, ushering passengers along. I walked fast, out of the station, into the streets of Dunedin, and I didn't stop until I was 2 blocks away. That night, I sat in my flat, staring at the mirror above my dresser. I covered it with a sheet before bed, unable to risk seeing myself hesitate half a second too long. But even with it covered, I dreamed of knocking, always 3 times. And in the dream, I was the one on the inside, begging someone else to open the door. I haven't taken that line since. I drive whenever I can, even if it takes longer. Still, every once in a while, I hear that rhythm when I'm alone. At night, 3 dull taps, from behind a wall, a door, or the mirror in the bathroom. I know if I listen too closely, if I lean in, I'll hear myself knocking back. And if I ever answer, I won't be here to tell you about it. I dropped into carriage 4 without thinking much about it, the way you do when you're tired after a long day. My bag was heavy with student essays I hadn't marked yet, and all I wanted was a quiet ride from Christchurch back toward my flat. I remember stepping through the doorway and immediately noticing how strangely quiet it was inside. No chatter, no phone calls, no rustle of newspapers, just rows of children sitting stiffly in their seats. They couldn't have been older than 12, most of them even younger, and every single one of them wore uniforms that didn't look right for the year. Dark blazers, knee socks, polished shoes, and ties knotted too tightly, the kind of formal attire schools hadn't required for decades. I froze in the aisle, staring. They didn't move. None of them even whispered. A little girl with braids tilted her head slightly as her eyes locked on me, and I realized with a sinking feeling that every single child was staring directly at me. Dozens of faces, blank and expressionless, turned toward me the moment I entered, as if they had been waiting. My throat dried up, but I forced myself to keep walking, muttering a quick, "Excuse me," while squeezing past. No one made room. I had to brush against stiff shoulders to reach an empty seat near the middle. Their eyes followed me the whole way. Sitting down, I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself there must be some event, maybe a historical reenactment or a school outing with a theme. But the longer I sat, the less that explanation made sense. None of the children carried backpacks or lunchboxes. Their hands were folded on their laps, perfectly still. And not once did I hear the shuffle of shoes or a cough, or even a sigh. Just silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the train wheels grinding against the rails. I pulled out a paper from my bag, hoping to distract myself with marking, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting up to the rows of keyful children. A boy in the second row leaned slightly into the aisle, his gaze unblinking. He had short hair combed neatly to one side, his face pale as chalk. His lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but no sound came. I forced myself to look back at the essay in my hands, my chest tightening as if I had inhaled smoke. Minutes crawled by. I thought about standing and moving to another carriage, but pride or stubbornness held me in place. I didn't want to look foolish, as though I couldn't sit among schoolchildren without panicking. Yet the longer I stayed, the more I noticed things that weren't right. Their uniforms were spotless, but frayed at the edges, seams loose like clothing pulled from an attic trunk. A faint, musty smell hung in the air, like wet wool left to rot, and their skin too pale, too grayish, as if sunlight hadn't touched them in years. When the train lurched around a bend, I heard something soft, the faintest scrape, like a shoe shifting against the floor. My eyes darted toward the sound. A little boy in the back row had turned fully in his seat to face me. His toy soldier rested on the armrest, but his hands never moved. The soldier seemed balanced in place, though I hadn't seen him pick it up or set it down. I couldn't take it anymore. I stuffed the paper back into my bag and stood up, muttering under my breath, "I'll change carriages." My voice cracked, and it felt strange hearing it in that dead silence. I walked quickly toward the door at the far end, every step like trudging through water. As I passed the rows, I felt the weight of their stares pressing harder. The girl with the braids turned her head to follow me, her eyes dark and bottomless. The moment I touched the door handle, the train screeched as it slowed into the next small station. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the connecting passage, relieved to hear the faint hum of voices from the next carriage. My chest loosened, the second I stepped inside, surrounded by ordinary commuters checking their phones and chatting. I glanced back once through the glass window. Carriage 4 looked dimmer somehow, and though I couldn't see their faces clearly, I knew every child was still staring straight at me. At the station stop, I nearly bolted off the train. My legs carried me down the platform before I realized I hadn't reached my stop yet. I debated waiting for another train, but shame pulled me back on board. I chose a carriage near the front this time, staying far away from number 4. I told myself it had to be some school group. Maybe my exhaustion had made everything feel strange. Maybe they were just unusually disciplined kids. But when the train reached my stop 20 minutes later, I risked one more look down the length of the platform. Carriage 4's windows were dark. Not a single silhouette moved inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of those faces haunted me, blank and heavy, with something I couldn't name. The stillness, the way they all stared, it felt deliberate, purposeful, like they wanted me to see them. By morning, I convinced myself I needed to check. Curiosity and fear pushed me to the library during lunch break. I searched through old newspapers on microfilm, scanning headlines about rail accidents. It didn't take long. August 1963. A school trip gone wrong. A carriage derailed near the river just outside Christchurch. 27 children and 2 teachers killed instantly. The article listed the school name. The photos showed children in the exact same uniforms I'd seen. The dark blazers, the knee socks, the braided hair. The little girl with the braids was in one of the grainy black and white pictures, her smile frozen in time. I sat there in the library, the newspaper trembling in my hands, unable to breathe. I remembered the boy with the toy soldier, the way it rested on the armrest without his touch. The report mentioned a recovered toy soldier, among the wreckage, clutched by one of the bodies. The reality crashed down on me, heavier than any load I'd carried from work. I hadn't stumbled into a school group. I had sat among the dead. For reasons I can't explain, that night in 2005, they had filled Carriage 4 again, replaying their final ride. And they had let me see it. I stopped taking the train after that. I found other ways home, longer walks, buses that rattled through side streets, but the memory never left. Sometimes, when I hear the distant whistle of a train at night, I see their faces pressed against the glass in my mind. Still, silent, waiting. You ask if I ever told anyone else. I tried once. I mentioned it to a colleague over drinks, and he laughed, said I'd been marking too many papers, that I dreamed it all up. I let it drop after that. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between imagination and the weight of real eyes staring at you. The hardest part isn't the memory of the silence or the strange clothes. It's the feeling I had when I first stepped into that carriage, before I even noticed the details. That gut-deep certainty that I was interrupting something, that I wasn't supposed to be there, but they let me in anyway. And if they let me in once, I wonder if they could do it again. I never sat in carriage 4 again. I never dared. But some nights, when I close my eyes, I still feel the train swaying, hear the wheels grinding, and see row after row of children in stiff uniforms turning their heads as one to look at me. And in that silence, I know they remember me too. I pulled the suitcase down from the rack without thinking twice. Just another passenger in a hurry to step off at Lillehammer before the platform filled. It was black, medium-sized, with a faded blue ribbon tied to the handle. I remembered tying one just like it on mine that morning so I wouldn't mistake it in the rush. I dragged it out with me, the wheels clacking on the concrete, and it wasn't until I was halfway through the station hall that I noticed the weight was wrong. Mine had been packed with neatly folded shirts, toiletries, and my laptop. This one felt heavier on one side, like it had uneven ballast. I stopped near the benches, flicked open the zipper just enough to peek inside, expecting maybe someone else's business clothes. Instead, the first thing I saw was the bright yellow ear of a stuffed rabbit. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. That rabbit was mine, the one I'd clutched to sleep through countless nights as a child before it was lost during one of our family moves. I pulled it out with trembling hands, turning it over, seeing the worn seam I had once stitched badly with my mother's thread. There was no mistaking it. A cold flush ran through me, and I zipped the case back up quickly, glancing around as if someone would accuse me of theft. No one was paying attention. I rolled it toward the restroom area, locked myself in a stall, and opened it fully this time. Inside was a collection that made my hands shake more violently with every item I touched. My old plastic recorder with the cracked mouthpiece, a pink diary with its flimsy lock still intact, the one I had filled with secrets before I came out, before anyone knew who I really was. A bundle of letters written in my own uneven childhood handwriting, addressed to future me. I read one. The words blurred as I whispered them. I hope you are happy. I hope you get to live as yourself. My throat closed up. I hadn't thought about those letters in years. I had burned most of them before moving away, afraid someone would find them. Yet here they were, tucked neatly in this stranger's suitcase, waiting for me on a train in 2015. I checked the luggage tag with my stomach knotted. The name was smudged, water-stained, but the address printed below hit me like a fist. It was my childhood home in Hamar, the one that had been demolished to make way for apartments a decade ago. My knees weakened, and I sat heavily on the toilet lid, staring at the tag until my vision swam. I knew I had to return it, to make sense of this. I zipped it shut and wheeled it back out, scanning the platform for someone looking frantic, someone searching for a missing bag. Nothing. The train had already pulled away. The other passengers had dispersed. The station was ordinary, humming with life, but the suitcase at my side felt like an anchor to something I didn't want to face. That night in my hotel room, I laid everything out on the bed. The rabbit, the diary, the recorder, the letters. There were clothes too, children's shirts and trousers, all ones I remembered wearing at different ages. I pressed my face into one shirt, breathing in dust and faint detergent, and a sob broke from me without warning. How could this be possible? Who would go to the trouble of collecting my lost things, and why? I convinced myself to look at the diary. The lock broke easily with a twist of a pen. I flipped through the pages, each one crowded with scrawled wishes, doodles, and confessions of a child who felt trapped in the wrong body. I wish I had been born a girl. I hate hiding. I will leave one day and never come back. I closed it quickly, hands shaking. I remembered writing those words, the shame and the hope. I had left them behind deliberately, trying to start fresh when I transitioned. Now they had found me. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the hotel floor, every sound of the pipes settling, made me glance at the suitcase as if it were alive. When dawn came, I decided to bring it straight to the police. Surely they could trace it. The officer at the Lillehammer station listened patiently as I explained. He examined the items, nodded at the address, but when he typed into his computer, he frowned. "This property was demolished in 2004, he said. I told him I already knew. He asked who else might have had access to my belongings before that time. I shook my head. My parents had died years ago, and I'd cut ties with most extended family. He looked at me carefully then, as if weighing whether I was making it up. "We'll file a report," he said, "but if you want my advice, leave it with us and try not to dwell on it." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But when he slid the suitcase back toward me, saying there was no theft to investigate, I couldn't bring myself to leave it. I wheeled it out again, heavier than ever, and carried it back to my hotel. That evening, I noticed something new. Tucked into the inner pocket was a photograph I hadn't seen the night before. It showed me at 7 years old, wearing a boy's jumper, holding the rabbit, smiling crookedly at the camera. Behind me stood a tall man whose face was blurred as if he'd moved when the photo was taken. I had never seen that picture before. It wasn't from any of our family albums. On the back, written in neat adult handwriting, were the words, "Found you." I dropped it, heart pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. Who had written that? Who had this suitcase before me? I didn't leave the hotel for 2 days. I kept the suitcase locked, but I couldn't stop myself from checking it, from making sure the items were still there. Each time, they looked slightly different, rearranged, as if someone had gone through them while I wasn't looking. Once, the diary lay open on the page that read, "I want to be seen." The third night, I woke to the sound of wheels rolling softly across the carpet. My eyes flew open. The suitcase had shifted from the corner of the room to the side of my bed. I scrambled up, fumbling for the light, but when it flicked on, nothing moved. The handle leaned against the sheets like a hand. I couldn't take it anymore. At dawn, I carried it to the edge of the river that runs through Lillehammer and heaved it into the water. I watched it sink, bubbles rising, the blue ribbon trailing like a tail. My hands shook, but I felt relief. It was gone. I left for the conference, tried to focus on my talk, tried to act normal. For a while, it worked. But when I returned to my hotel that night, the suitcase was waiting at the door. Damp, dripping, the ribbon darker from the water. I screamed, slammed the door and called the police again. They came, checked, and found nothing unusual. The suitcase was gone when they entered. They looked at me with pity, perhaps thinking stress had broken me. They left with polite words, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. That was 8 years ago. I've moved cities since, even changed jobs. But sometimes when I travel by train, I see it again. Sitting on the rack above me, resting at the platform. Always, with the faded blue ribbon tied neatly to the handle. I never touch it now. I pretend not to see it, though my whole body tenses until I'm sure it won't follow me home. But last week, when I opened my own suitcase after a long trip, I found the rabbit lying on top of my clothes, dry and soft, smelling faintly of my childhood home. I don't know how it got there. I don't know who wants me to remember the life I tried so hard to leave behind. All I know is that wherever I go, the past keeps arriving with me, packed neatly in a bag I can't seem to put down. I still keep the room key on my dashboard. A brass tag with the number 7 etched deep into it though. Some nights, I swear it says 3. It's heavy for its size, polished smooth, from how many times I've turned it over in my hands. It's the last thing I took from the Suncrest Motel, the one with the flickering sign off Highway 70, just outside Globe, Arizona. Halloween night, 2016. I'd been driving for 9 hours straight, selling plumbing parts to hardware stores that didn't need them, calling my ex-wife every other rest stop and hanging up before she answered. That key shouldn't have my name on it, but it does. David Harper, deeply engraved on the back. I told myself I must have imagined it, but it's still there. I can feel the groove of every letter when I run my thumb across it. I wasn't planning on staying the night anywhere. I had a thermos of coffee, a pack of stale crackers, and a plan to make it to Lordsburg before dawn. But the desert had that strange stillness that comes just before midnight, when the heat finally drains out of the air and everything feels hollow. That's when I saw the sign, bright red letters humming against the black sky. Suncrest Motel vacancy. The rest of the highway was empty, not a single car, not even the hum of a distant engine. I slowed down, thinking maybe I could use a few hours of sleep before continuing. I didn't remember seeing the motel on that stretch before, though I'd driven the route dozens of times. But fatigue plays tricks on you. I told myself that as I pulled in. The parking lot was cracked asphalt, pale under the buzzing sign. A Coke machine leaned against the office wall, half lit, buttons labeled with brands that had gone out of style decades ago. Tab, RC Cola. Inside the office, a woman sat behind the counter, maybe in her 60s, hair done up like she'd stepped out of the 70s. She didn't look up when I came in, just slid a ledger toward me and asked if I wanted a single. Her voice was low, tired, like she'd been doing this for years. I nodded. She flipped the book around, and there it was, my name, already written on the line, David Harper, in neat cursive, like I'd signed it myself. I froze. I didn't. I started, but she just smiled and reached under the counter. Already took care of it, she said. Then she handed me a key. Old-fashioned, metal, with a brass tag stamped, Room 7. My name was engraved on the back. My heart gave a hard thud. I told myself maybe she'd gotten it from the reservation system, but there wasn't a computer in sight. Just the ledger, a rotary phone, and a dusty clock ticking on the wall. I almost turned around right then, but the air outside had grown colder, and the idea of sleeping in my car felt worse. So, I took the key. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant. Each door looked identical, peeling paint, faded gold numbers. I passed Room 3, Room 4, and Room 5. Then, when I reached the end, I saw Room 7 twice. Both doors had the same brass number plate, tarnished at the edges. I stopped, squinting, thinking maybe one of them was a reflection. But no, 2 identical doors. I hesitated, then unlocked the first. The key turned smoothly. Inside was a standard room, twin bed, floral curtains, humming mini fridge. I dropped my bag, turned on the TV. Static. No channels, just a low hiss. I shut it off. When I glanced at the key on the nightstand, the tag said, Room 3. I stared for a full minute, my breath shallow. I even turned it over, my name was still there, the engraving faintly warm to the touch. Room 3. I laughed to myself, though it came out shaky. Probably a manufacturing error, or my eyes playing tricks after too many hours on the road. I took a shower to clear my head. The water came out lukewarm and metallic. When I stepped out, the mirror was fogged over, except for one patch where words had formed in the condensation, "Welcome back." I wiped at it, but the letters didn't fade, just sank deeper, like they were etched into the glass itself. That's when I noticed the faint scent of cigarette smoke. Marlboros, the same brand my ex-wife used to smoke on the porch when she thought I was asleep. I'd always hated that smell, still do. I checked the room for an open window, for a vent, anything. Nothing. I packed up my things right then, ready to leave. But when I opened the door, the hallway outside was different. The lights had dimmed, the walls were a darker shade, and every door down the hall had the same number. 7. I tried the first one, locked, then the next, then another. The fourth door opened. Inside was the same room, same curtains, same bedspread. My bag sat on the chair, exactly where I'd left it. Only this time, the TV was on. A static-filled screen with faint shapes flickering behind the noise silhouettes that looked like people sitting around a table. I turned it off, but the reflection lingered in the black screen a few seconds longer than it should have. I felt sick, dizzy. The air tasted like dust and burnt ozone. When I went back to the office, the woman was gone. The ledger sat open on the counter. I flipped back through the pages. Every name was mine. Every date different: 1992, 2004, 2016, and all signed in my handwriting. I picked up the rotary phone, tried dialing out. The line hissed, then a voice answered, faint, distant. It was my own. "Don't check out," it whispered. "It doesn't change anything." I dropped the phone, stumbled back. The receiver swung gently, tapping the counter. I must have blacked out for a while, sitting there in the lobby chair, because when I came to, the lights were dim and a man stood outside by my car. I watched him through the glass. He looked familiar. Same build, same posture, even the same jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass key. When he turned toward the door, I saw his face. Mine. I bolted. Ran down the hall, past the doors marked 7, until my lungs burned. I slammed into one, turned the key any key, and fell inside. It was morning. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. My car sat outside, dew on the windshield. The air smelled normal again, faintly of coffee and detergent. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it, but the ledger still lay open on the desk when I checked out, and the woman behind the counter didn't look surprised. "Long night?" she asked. Her voice was younger this time. She slid the receipt toward me, my name already signed. The date said the 31st of October 2017, a full year later. I blinked hard, checked my watch, same model, but the calendar read the same thing, 2017. She smiled faintly when I didn't respond. "You can come back any time, Mr. Harper. Room's always ready." I drove off. I should have felt relief, but the sky looked off too pale, washed out. My phone had no signal. When I pulled into a diner near Miami, Arizona, I asked the waitress what day it was. She laughed. "Halloween," she said. "You okay, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her about the motel, about the key, but she frowned. "Suncrest? That place has been closed since the 90s. Burned down, didn't it?" She walked away before I could ask more. When I looked down at the key on the table, the number had changed again. 5, this time. That night, I stayed at a regular chain motel, Comfort Inn off the highway. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that static hiss from the TV. Once, I thought I saw the reflection again in the dark. My own face, looking back at me from inside the mirror, mouth moving silently. The next morning, I noticed the skin on my palm where I'd held the key was red, almost burned, shaped exactly like the tag's outline. It never faded. Still hasn't. I've tried to throw the key away. Twice. The first time, I left it in a trash bin at a rest stop outside Deming. An hour later, I stopped for gas, and there it was again, hanging from my ignition. The second time, I tossed it into the Gila River. That night, I woke up in another motel, the curtains floral, the air humming faintly. The key lay on the nightstand. Room 7. I don't drive Highway 70 anymore. Doesn't matter. Sometimes I still see the glow of that red sign on the horizon when I'm miles from anywhere. Always the same hum, the same faint buzz in the air. And sometimes, when I stop at a motel in another state, Oklahoma, New Mexico, doesn't matter. The clerk hands me a key that feels too familiar. Always brass, always heavy. If you ever find yourself on an empty stretch of road at night and see a neon sign that says vacancy, keep driving. Even if you're tired. Even if you think you can rest just a few hours. Because once you check in, the place remembers you. And it doesn't always let you leave. I was half asleep when I first noticed him. The train had just pulled away from Kita-Niju-Yojo station, and like always, I sat in the same seat near the middle of the carriage, clutching my briefcase on my lap. My routine was so fixed I could almost close my eyes and feel every sway, every stop without looking up. That morning, though, I lifted my head and caught sight of someone standing across from me. A man, not very tall, dressed in a dark coat buttoned up to his neck. He didn't sit, he just stood by the door, facing straight ahead, his hands hidden in his pockets. His stillness pulled me out of my daze, though I thought nothing of it then. Trains were full of odd types, people too tired to sit or too anxious to rest. I went back to staring at my shoes, shaking off the unease. The next day, he was there again. Same carriage, same spot, same posture. I tried not to stare, but the regularity of it made me curious. I told myself, maybe he lived nearby and caught the same train every morning, like me. But something about his presence nagged at me. Passengers shifted, fidgeted, scrolled on their phones. He didn't. Not even when the train jolted. He stood like a statue, gaze locked somewhere just above the glass door. When I got off at Sapporo Station, I glanced back, expecting him to move, but the doors shut with him still inside. By the third day, I felt certain he hadn't left the train. I boarded, settled in, and looked immediately toward his spot. There he was, coat buttoned, hands tucked away, head slightly tilted forward. He was so constant, it felt like he belonged to the train itself, like part of its machinery. I decided I'd watch him more carefully. At each stop, passengers got off and on, but he stayed, always stayed. Not a shift in weight, not a glance downward, nothing. A thought started pressing against me. What if he never left? What if he rode endlessly, looping the city, never touching the platform? I told myself I was, being ridiculous. But curiosity, once it gets hold of me, doesn't let go. That Friday, I decided I would follow him. My stop came, but I stayed in my seat, pretending to read my phone, sneaking glances at him. The train carried on, 1 stop, 2 stops, 3. Each time the doors opened, the platform filled with commuters, then emptied. He remained. Always upright, always silent. My nerves began to prickle. I wondered if anyone else noticed, or if it was only me. When the train finally reached a smaller suburban station, fewer people got on. My pulse quickened. If he left now, I'd trail behind casually. I told myself I just wanted to solve the puzzle, to break the strange cycle. Then it happened. The train doors hissed open and, for the first time, he moved. His head turned slightly, his legs carried him across the floor, and he stepped off without hesitation. My heart lurched. I grabbed my bag and slipped out too, keeping a careful distance. The cold air bit at my face, but I hardly noticed. He walked with steady steps toward the far end of the platform, not looking left or right. I kept pace, maybe 15 meters behind, No one else lingered, it was just him and me. Then, without warning, he veered off not toward the exit, but straight to the end barrier of the platform. He didn't stop. He stepped past the warning strip, past the yellow paint, and dropped down onto the tracks. I froze. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to let him vanish into whatever madness he was following. But I couldn't. I lowered myself onto the gravel after him. He didn't run, didn't climb across hurriedly. He just walked, as if the frozen ground belonged to him. His figure grew smaller as he headed toward a tunnel up ahead. The station behind me went silent. No one shouted, no alarms blared. It was as if the world had turned its eyes away. Against every shred of reason, I followed. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The crunch of frozen gravel echoed beneath my shoes, but his footsteps made no sound. The air grew colder, sharper, until each breath stabbed my chest. My thoughts tangled between fear and determination. If I could just see where he went, maybe I'd understand. The tunnel loomed, a black mouth swallowing the light. He entered without pause. My instincts screamed, but I went in after him. Inside, the darkness was almost absolute. Only the faintest glow from the entrance behind me lit the walls. I squinted, trying to trace his outline. For a moment, I lost him. Then I saw it farther ahead, the silhouette of that coat, upright and unwavering. He was waiting, not walking anymore, just standing in the middle of the tracks. My legs wavered. The air pressed heavy on me, carrying a damp smell like rust and old stone. When I finally stepped closer, his head turned slightly, though I never saw his face fully. His voice reached me, thin and steady. "You shouldn't be here." My throat locked up. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but no words came. He turned back and walked again, deeper into the tunnel. My panic burst through the fog. I should run. I should climb out. But my body betrayed me, dragging me after him, as if I was tethered. My steps quickened, desperate to keep up. I needed to know what he was. Then, after what felt like endless minutes, the tunnel opened abruptly into a clearing of snow and steel. Tracks stretched out beneath a sky I didn't recognize. No station, no houses, just frozen emptiness. I spun around. The tunnel behind me was gone. There was no entrance, no platform, no sign of where I'd come from. Only endless tracks cutting across the ice. My chest squeezed with terror. The man stood a few meters ahead, finally turning fully toward me. His face was pale, blurred almost, as if my eyes couldn't pin it down. "You followed," he said, calm, almost disappointed. My voice cracked when I finally forced words out. "Where is this? What is this place?" He tilted his head. "It's where the ones who don't leave belong." A gust of icy wind slammed against me, nearly knocking me over. My mind raced. Was I dead? Had I crossed into some place I wasn't meant to see? He began walking again, farther along the tracks, and something inside me rebelled. I couldn't keep following. I dropped to my knees, clutching the gravel, my breath tearing out of me. "I don't belong here," I shouted, though my voice sounded small, swallowed by the vastness. He stopped, turned once more, and for the first time I sensed the weight of his gaze. It wasn't anger, it was emptiness, a void so profound I staggered back. Then he lifted a hand from his pocket, pointing past me. "Then go." I twisted around, desperate. At first, I saw only the endless white, but then, faintly, a shape shimmered in the distance, a doorway of light, flickering like the outline of a station. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the icy ground, and ran. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. Behind me, silence pressed heavy, no footsteps following. The doorway grew sharper, brighter, until I threw myself through it with everything I had. The next thing I knew, I was sprawled across a platform, gasping, my hands raw against cold tiles. I blinked up at fluorescent lights, the sound of announcements echoing faintly overhead. Commuters bustled around, oblivious. The train I'd boarded earlier was gone. My heart pounded as I stumbled upright, clutching the nearest bench for balance. No one looked at me twice. I checked the station sign, Sapporo. My station, the same as every morning. But the clock above showed nearly 3 hours had passed. I never saw him again after that. I forced myself back into routine, clinging to normalcy, but the unease never left. Sometimes, when the train doors hiss open and I catch a glimpse of the platform, I feel a shiver, like I'll see him standing there again. I can't shake the thought that he let me go only because I resisted long enough. Because I declared I didn't belong. But the tracks, the frozen emptiness, they wait. And I know, if I'd stayed silent, if I'd kept following, I wouldn't be here to tell you this at all. I bent down because I nearly tripped over it. That's the only reason I even noticed the phone lying there on the floor between the seats. Screen lighting up with each vibration against the metal rail. People around me were packed in tightly, all masked, tired, and pretending not to notice. But the screen flashed up toward me, and I caught the words clear as day. Don't answer. That was the name saved on the contact. And the call just wouldn't stop. At first, I thought someone must have dropped it. I glanced around, trying to figure out who it belonged to. But everyone had their eyes down, earphones in, fingers tapping away at their own devices. The ringtone wasn't even anything dramatic, just the default tone repeating over and over, vibrating through the carriage. I expected someone to reach for it, embarrassed, but nobody did. I picked it up. The phone was warm, like it had been in someone's pocket moments ago. It looked modern, slim, clean, not the kind of old thing someone would abandon. The train jolted, and the ringtone cut through the hum of the wheels. I raised my voice slightly. "Excuse me, anyone drop a phone?" A few heads turned, but quickly back down again. It was the strangest thing, like people heard me, but didn't want to react. The call kept ringing. The screen stayed lit. Don't answer. My instinct told me to set it on the seat and leave it. Someone would claim it eventually. But just as I leaned forward to put it down, the call ended on its own. The carriage fell back into its usual noises, the wheels, the muffled voices. My shoulders loosened a little, but seconds later, the vibration came back, harder, buzzing against my palm. The same contact name lit up. I felt a strange heat crawling up my chest. It's silly now, but the name itself was messing with my head. Don't answer. Like a warning, but also like a dare. I looked at the woman sitting nearest to me. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her black hair pulled into a loose bun. She had been pretending to sleep, but I caught her glancing at the screen in my hand. Her expression tightened like she recognized it. I asked her quietly, "Is this yours?" She shook her head fast, almost too fast, and muttered, "No, don't touch it." Her voice cracked, and then she turned her body away from me. That should have been my cue. I should have just put it down and ignored it. But the phone wouldn't stop, the insistent buzzing against my palm, and everyone else kept ignoring me like I was the only one hearing it. The woman shifted suddenly, reaching forward. "Just put it down. Don't answer," she whispered, sharper this time. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the front of the carriage. And then, against everything in me, I did the opposite. I swiped the screen. The call connected. I pressed the phone to my ear, and I swear I stopped breathing. There wasn't static, there wasn't background noise. There was a voice calm, low, and impossibly close, like it was speaking from inside the phone and inside my head at the same time. It said my name, not just once, 3 times, steady, deliberate, my full name. I pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. The call timer was counting, the voice still murmuring faintly. I snapped it shut against my leg, like that would silence it. My throat felt dry. Nobody in that train should have known my full name, not like that. I'm a foreigner in Nagoya, not someone who stands out. I told myself it was a trick. Maybe the owner of the phone had my name from something, a work connection, a directory, anything. But the moment I thought that, the voice came again, louder this time, right against my ear even though the phone was locked against my thigh. "Look at me." I froze. The woman across from me let out the smallest gasp, like she'd heard it too. My eyes darted up, scanning the rows of passengers. Everyone sat still, silent, like mannequins in their seats. And then I saw one man, far at the end of the carriage, standing in the connecting doorway. He wasn't moving to come in. He was just standing there, head tilted slightly, watching. The phone buzzed once more, then went dead. Battery drained, black screen. My hands were slick with sweat. The man at the end still hadn't moved. I wanted to convince myself he was just another commuter, maybe waiting for the next stop. But his eyes didn't leave me, not once. When the train slowed into the next station, I stood up fast. The woman who had warned me whispered under her breath, "Don't get off." Her hand gripped the seat edge like she wanted to stop me, but she didn't move. My instinct screamed the opposite. I needed to get away. I shoved through the crowd and stepped off onto the platform. Relief hit for a second, just breathing in the wider space. But then I realized he had stepped off too, the same man. He didn't push, didn't rush, just followed. I darted toward the stairs, half running, people bumping into me as I moved. My heart pounded so hard it made me dizzy. When I reached the turnstiles, I glanced back. He wasn't running, but he was still there, stepping down slowly, like he knew I couldn't outrun him no matter how far I tried. I bolted into the street. Cars, lights, the endless blur of city movement, it all felt unreal, like I was watching through glass. I ducked into a convenience store, chest heaving, and pretended to browse drinks. After a minute, I dared to peek out the glass door. He was across the street, standing completely still, head still tilted, staring through the traffic right at me. I stayed in that store for nearly an hour, pretending to shop, texting a friend, waiting for him to give up. But when I left, weaving through side streets toward my apartment, I swear I heard footsteps mirroring mine. Every time I turned, nothing. Just shadows and the echo of shoes against pavement. That night, I couldn't sleep. The phone, I wasn't with me, I'd dropped it in the rush. But at 2 a.m., my own phone lit up on the bedside table. No ringtone, just a vibration. Unknown number. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to see the screen, but I did. The name that flashed across it wasn't unknown. It wasn't numbers. It said the same thing, "Don't answer." My stomach turned. I didn't pick it up. I left it buzzing until the battery drained. The next morning, I tried to tell myself I had imagined it, that stress and exhaustion had twisted something ordinary into something terrifying. I went to work, tried to bury it in routine. By the evening, I convinced myself to take the train again, but I made sure it was earlier, more crowded, more normal. Halfway through the ride, I spotted her, the woman from before, the one who told me not to touch it. She was standing by the doors, eyes wide when she saw me. She came closer, voice urgent but hushed. "It follows whoever answers. That's why nobody touches it." "You should have listened," I asked. "What is it? Who's calling?" Her eyes darted around, then back at me. "Not who. What? Once it knows your name, it won't stop. It doesn't need the phone anymore." The doors opened, and she stepped off without another word. I stood there shaking, gripping the pole until my knuckles hurt. For weeks, I kept noticing him. Always in the distance, the tilted head, the same eyes, just enough for me to know it wasn't random. Sometimes across the street, sometimes reflected in a train window, once even standing in the far corner of my own apartment building's lobby as I walked in. Nobody else ever reacted. It all ended the night I decided to face it. I couldn't keep living like prey. When my phone buzzed again, with that same name flashing, I picked up. I put it to my ear and forced out, "What do you want?" The voice was calm, steady. "I already have it." I asked, "Have what?" There was silence, then a click. I didn't understand until I tried calling my mother later that night, just to hear her voice. The call didn't go through. My contacts list had been wiped, except for one entry. Every name, every number, erased. Only one remained in my phone book, locked, uneditable. It wasn't even a number, it was just 2 words, "Don't answer." And when I tapped it by accident, my phone began dialing on its own. I didn't put it to my ear. I didn't need to. I could already hear breathing on the other end, faint but steady, matching my own. That was the last time I tried to fight it. Now, I keep my phone on silent. I don't look at the screen when it lights up. I go through my days like anyone else, pretending nothing's wrong. But every time I step onto a train, I feel the eyes at the far end of the carriage, watching, waiting. And I know the next time I pick up, I won't be the one telling this story. The call came through just as I was logging a patient's vitals into the system. "Dr. Nilsson, urgent consult in Ward C, room 12. I froze with my hand hovering above the keyboard. "Ward C?" I repeated into the intercom, half laughing. That's not a thing. You must mean Ward B." The voice on the other end was flat, mechanical, almost as if pre-recorded. "Ward C, room 12. Patient is unresponsive." Then silence, no static, no sign-off, just the deadline humming quietly back at me. I remember the exact feeling that crawled through me, like my body understood something my mind refused to. The hospital in Bergen was old, built in layers over the decades. My first week, I'd been told that Ward C had been closed since the 1,980 seconds after a series of unfortunate events, which everyone conveniently stopped explaining the moment I asked questions. It was a ghost on the floor plan, still visible on blueprints, but walled off physically. We'd joke about it sometimes. "If a pager ever says Ward C, you ignore it," one of the senior nurses once laughed. So, naturally, I didn't ignore it. I told myself it had to be a system glitch. The intercom network was ancient, the kind that still used analog transmitters. I grabbed my ID and flashlight and headed for the eastern corridor. It was quiet, too quiet for a hospital, especially around midnight. Even the usual sound of oxygen pumps and distant wheel squeaks felt dulled, like the building was holding its breath. My shoes clicked down the polished linoleum, echoing far longer than they should have. I passed Ward B, its lights warm and alive with soft conversation, and reached the hallway that supposedly ended at a locked storage area. But it didn't end. That night, there was another door. A gray, metal fire door with a faded C stenciled onto it. My breath caught in my throat. I had walked this same stretch of hall hundreds of times. That door had never existed. I ran my hand along the frame. It was cold, almost icy. For a moment I considered calling security, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I swiped my ID out of habit. The reader beeped green. I wasn't supposed to have clearance, but the lock released with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled different, antiseptic, layered over something sweet and decayed. The corridor was long and narrow, with peeling paint and old signage hanging at odd angles. The lights flickered weakly, half of them dead, casting uneven shadows that stretched across the floor. My flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding embarrassingly small. "Medical staff, here. I got a call for Ward C, room 12. My words bounced back, distorted by the hallway's strange acoustics. I walked past a nurse's station, covered in dust. A half-finished cup of coffee still sat there, the liquid inside blackened and congealed. The whiteboard behind the desk listed patient names in faded marker, all dated from 1983. My chest tightened. This wasn't just an unused wing, it had been frozen in time. And yet, I could hear something faint, rhythmic, a soft beeping, like a heart monitor. I followed the sound until I reached a room with the number 12 etched into a tarnished brass plate. The door was ajar. I nudged it open with my elbow. Inside, an old hospital bed sat against the far wall, its frame rusting, the sheets yellowed. A figure lay on it, covered up to the chest with a stiff, gray blanket. The monitor beside the bed flickered weakly, displaying a flat line. But the beeping continued steady, mechanical, detached from any logic. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming at me to stop. The man in the bed looked wrong. His skin was stretched thin, his eyes sunken but open, staring at the ceiling. His mouth was slightly parted, as if caught mid-breath. I touched his wrist out of reflex, searching for a pulse. Nothing, cold as marble. But as soon as my fingers left his skin, the beeping stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. And then, in that silence, I heard whispering. Faint, overlapping voices like a dozen conversations bleeding through static. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight at the walls. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, vents, ceiling tiles, even the floor beneath me. "Who's there?" I demanded, louder now. My throat tightened. No answer, only the whispers folding over one another, growing sharper. Then a single word emerged, clear and deliberate, cutting through the noise. "Stay." My flashlight flickered and went dark. The overhead lights followed, plunging everything into black. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I pulled out my phone, but the screen glowed only for a second before dying too. The only thing I could hear was my own breath and something else, faint but deliberate, like slow footsteps approaching behind me. I turned, but there was nothing. Just the outline of the bed, the patient still lying there. Then his head moved, just slightly, a slow tilt toward me, bones creaking like wood. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "You're late," he rasped. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe hard enough to send pain shooting down my arm. "You shouldn't be here," I said, but my voice came out shaky, almost pleading. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. "None of us should," I bolted. The hallway stretched longer than before, impossibly long. My footsteps slapped against the tile as the whispers rose into a low wail. The door I'd entered from was gone. Every exit led to another hallway, another corner. I could feel the air thickening, colder, heavier with each breath. My flashlight finally flickered back on for a second, just long enough to catch a glimpse of figures standing inside the rooms I passed. Dozens of them, some watching me through glass, others standing right at the thresholds, motionless. I found a stairwell at last and sprinted down, 2 steps at a time, until I hit the next floor. The metal door slammed behind me, cutting off the noise. I collapsed against the wall, gasping. When I finally looked up, I was in the main wing again. Ward B's lights glowed warm and steady. Nurses passed by with charts and IV poles like nothing had happened. I wanted to cry from relief. I stumbled to the security desk, nearly shouting, "You have to check the eastern corridor, someone's in Ward C." The guard blinked at me, confused. "Ward what?" "Ward C," I repeated. "There's a patient in room 12, there was a man." He cut me off gently. Doctor, there is no Ward C. That section was sealed off in 1984 after the incident. He said it like he'd said it before, like I wasn't the first. I didn't believe him. I grabbed his monitor and rewound the hallway footage myself. The camera showed me walking toward the corridor, then nothing. The frame froze on the moment I reached the blank wall where the door should have been. I didn't appear again. I played it twice, 3 times. The guard shifted nervously beside me. Maybe you were in another section, he offered, but his voice cracked slightly. I didn't sleep the next day. I kept replaying it in my head, that door, that room, that voice saying, "You're late." By the next shift, I convinced myself it was stress, a hallucination. I even walked back to the same corridor. The wall was solid now, white plaster from end to end. No seams, no hidden hinges, nothing. I placed my hand against it anyway. It was colder than the rest of the hall. 2 days later, I was called into administration. They said security had flagged suspicious activity from my ID. Apparently, my access log showed entries into restricted areas that don't exist anymore. You understand this can't be happening, right? My supervisor said quietly. Ward C hasn't been on our digital system for 20 years. She handed me the printed log. The timestamp was 017, same minute as the call I'd received, my badge number, my signature. That night, the intercom crackled again. I was in the break room alone, stirring coffee that I wasn't going to drink. "Dr. Nilsson," the voice said softly, "follow protocol. Ward C, room 12. The cup fell from my hand. The sound of it shattering barely registered. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned off the radio, unplugged the intercom, even removed the batteries from the pager. Still, the voice came through. Patient, unresponsive. I ran to the nurse's station. My colleague Liv looked up from her chart. "You look like hell," she said. "It's the intercom again," I stammered. "You didn't hear it?" She frowned. "Hear what?" I pulled her toward the corridor, my voice breaking. "Come with me, please. Just look." We reached the same wall. Smooth, white, unremarkable. "There's nothing here," she whispered, touching my shoulder gently. "Maybe you need some rest." I nodded weakly, pretending to agree. But when I turned to leave, the faint outline of the door shimmered back into view, just enough for me to see the faded sea. Liv didn't see it. Her eyes met mine with concern, not fear. I didn't try to explain. I couldn't. I knew what would happen if I opened it again. I filed my resignation the next day. I packed up my locker, returned my badge, and walked out into the cold Bergen air. I thought that would be the end of it. But last week, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed hospital paper. Typed neatly at the top, "Dr. Ingrid Nilsson, assigned night duty, Ward C, room 12." The date was the 14th of February 1983. I keep it in a drawer now, though I should have burned it. Sometimes, late at night, my phone vibrates with no caller ID, and I hear that same voice through the static. Calm, professional, patient, unresponsive. And every time, for a second, I almost answer. Because deep down, a part of me still believes I left someone waiting there. It started with a sound I couldn't ignore. I was halfway through my patrol when it echoed that soft, unmistakable scrape of metal on ice. For a second, I thought I imagined it. The rink had been closed for the night, lights out, gates locked, my radio quiet. It was just me, the hum of the refrigeration system, and that hollow, cold silence I'd grown used to after 10 years on night duty. But then I heard it again, the rhythmic glide. Stop, turn. Someone was skating. At 2 in the morning. I remember standing in the hallway outside the rink, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The noise came from beyond the glass doors that opened into the arena. I knew that sound too well. My daughter, Lisa, used to skate like that, smooth, careful turns, the faint double-edged scrape when she corrected her balance. It hit me all at once, that memory of waiting for her during lessons, the same sound filling the place. My chest tightened as I pushed through the Bauta door, telling myself it was just a leftover recording from the PA system, or maybe a loose pipe vibrating against the boards. Something mechanical, something normal. The air inside was freezing. I stepped onto the rubber matting that circled the rink and swung the flashlight beam across the ice. Empty. No one there, just rows of seats and the ghostly reflection of my own light moving across the glass barriers. The sound had stopped. I tried the lights, but the control panel was locked. Only the manager had the key. I should have called it in, but I didn't. It felt too small, too strange to explain. So I walked the perimeter, scanning for movement, half expecting some kid to pop out laughing, maybe a late-night dare gone wrong. Nothing. When I reached the far side, something caught my eye. A single skate mark carved into the ice fresh, a clean line cutting across the frozen surface. That wasn't possible. The Zamboni had resurfaced it after the youth league finished, and I was there when the machine shut down. No one had stepped foot on it since. I leaned over the barrier, the beam tracing the line. It curved once, twice, then disappeared into the reflection of the opposite wall. My breath fogged the glass. I remember whispering her name, not even realizing I'd said it. Lisa? It slipped out of me like muscle memory, like I was answering something deep in my bones. I'd barely slept that morning. When the day staff arrived, I mentioned hearing noises. They laughed, said the building made strange sounds when the refrigeration kicked into defrost mode. One guy patted my shoulder and told me to get more coffee. I nodded along, but inside, something wouldn't settle. I started keeping my own notes after that time. Sounds, what direction they came from. The next few nights were quiet. I convinced myself it had just been fatigue or imagination. Until Thursday. That night, it began differently, faint humming, like a tune being carried through the vents. I followed it from the break room corridor to the main entrance, the melody growing clearer with every step. It wasn't random, it was a children's song. Seinen and Uni, the one Lisa always hummed before her competitions, when she was nervous. The sound faded as I reached the rink doors, and when I opened them, the temperature hit me like a wall. The ice was glistening under the dim emergency lights, and there near the center, a small figure moved in slow circles. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. The shape was faint, like it barely caught the light, but it was real. I could see movement, the sway of arms, the arc of a spin. My flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering on the floor, and when I bent to grab it, she was gone. The rink was empty again. I stood there, breathing so hard I could hear my pulse. I told myself maybe someone had broken in. Maybe the reflection from the outer glass made it look like a person. Still, I checked the doors, every lock, every corridor. Everything was sealed tight. I didn't tell anyone. Not that time. I just kept showing up, walking my rounds, pretending everything was fine. But I started to dread the moment the building went still. The arena had this way of amplifying silence, like it pressed against your ears until you started hearing things that weren't there. I tried leaving the radio on low, just static in the background, but that made it worse. Sometimes I'd hear the faint click of skates again, just under the noise. Once, I even saw condensation forming on the inside of the glass as if someone was breathing close to it from the other side. 2 weeks later, management installed new security cameras. They wanted overnight footage checked daily, so I set up the monitors in the control room. That first night, I stayed there longer than usual, sipping coffee and watching each feed in turn. Around 2:47 a.m., I heard the scraping again, faint but steady. I turned to the screens. One camera facing the rink caught movement. My heart nearly stopped. Someone small, slender, gliding slowly across the ice. No skates flashing, no visible shadow. Just smooth, silent motion. I rewound the tape, thinking it was a glitch. When I played it back, the image flickered, then froze, and I saw her face. Not clearly, not like you'd see a living person, but the outline, the posture Lisa at 9 years old, in her skating costume. The same one from her final competition before she disappeared. I didn't breathe for almost a minute. My hands shook so violently that I spilled the coffee all over the desk. I played the clip again. Same thing, motion for 3 seconds, then static. I saved the file onto a USB stick, pocketed it, and went home as soon as my shift ended. I must have watched it a dozen times that day, trying to convince myself it wasn't her. But I knew every detail, the braid, the way she tilted her head when she turned. My wife and I had buried an empty coffin. They never found her body after she vanished from that very rink 15 years ago. I'd taken this job after the divorce, thinking maybe it would bring me some kind of closure. Instead, it felt like the past had finally started watching me back. The next night, I brought her old locket with me, the one I'd kept in my locker since she disappeared. I don't know what I expected to happen. Maybe I thought it would stop whatever was happening. Around 3 a.m., I sat in the control room, locket in my palm, listening. Nothing. Not even the usual creaks. I thought maybe it was over. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. I switched to the rink camera. The ice surface was perfectly smooth. Then a faint line appeared across it. Just one, then another. It looked like someone was skating, tracing letters. I grabbed my flashlight and ran down the hall, my boots echoing through the empty building. When I reached the doors, I stopped dead. The parent marks were still forming, slow, deliberate. I watched in absolute silence as they curved into shapes letters, one by one. L-I. I stepped closer, breath trembling, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Lisa. Her name, written clear across the center of the rink in fresh skate lines. My knees nearly gave out. I wanted to believe it was a trick, some glitch from the cooling system or ice expansion, but the curves were perfect, like they'd been cut by a skilled skater's blade. I whispered again, "Lisa, please." My voice cracked. The air around me felt heavy, like every sound got swallowed before it reached the walls. I walked to the edge of the rink, my flashlight trembling over the ice. The temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Something tugged at my sleeve, gentle, like a child asking for attention. I turned around, no one there. The tug came again, stronger. I stumbled backward, and my flashlight rolled across the floor, spinning beams over the ice until it stopped, pointing directly at the center. And there, clear as glass, stood a small pair of skates, just sitting upright, untouched, right above her name. I couldn't move. I just stared. They were hers. I knew the scuff marks, the small red lace tag she'd tied on the left one because it always came loose. I should have been terrified, but what I felt was worse, grief so sharp it felt physical. I walked onto the ice, step by slow step, shoes slipping. When I reached the skates, the air around me stilled. The hum of the compressors faded. Everything went silent. I crouched, picked them up, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The ice cracked beneath me, just a hairline split enough to send me stumbling back to the boards. I got off the rink and didn't look back until I reached the control room. When I reviewed the footage from that hour, the monitor showed nothing but me walking in circles, standing still, staring at empty ice. No writing, no skates, no flickering lights. I checked the spot later with the day staff. The ice was flawless, freshly frozen, no marks at all. I didn't mention her name. I just said the cameras must be malfunctioning. That should have been the end of it. But that night, as I was leaving, I found something on my car windshield. A folded note. No envelope. Inside, written in faint pencil, were 5 words. She skates when you listen. My throat went dry. I looked around the lot, no one there, just frost glinting under the yellow lamps. I didn't tell the police. Who would believe me? For weeks after, I avoided the rink, took assignments in other parts of the complex, boiler checks, storage rounds, anything but the arena. Still, I'd hear it sometimes from a distance, that faint scrape of skates on ice, echoing through concrete walls. Each time, I'd turn off my radio, close my eyes, and let it pass. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I went back, alone, after everyone had left. I stood by the boards, flashlight off, and whispered softly, "I'm here." For a moment, nothing. Then faintly the sound began again. Smooth, patient glides, the familiar rhythm of her practice steps. I didn't see her, but I could feel her, a presence circling me, moving faster with each turn. I whispered her name one last time. The sound stopped, complete silence. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the ice, a single knock, dull and final like a door closing. I left my badge on the desk that night. The next day, I turned in my resignation and never went back. I kept the skates though. They're in a box at home, wrapped in an old towel. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint scrape of metal somewhere in the house. I don't check anymore. Maybe it's just the house settling, or maybe she's still practicing somewhere, waiting for me to listen. Whatever it is, it's quieter now, peaceful, almost. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear her humming that same song, soft and far away, but steady, as if she finally finished her routine. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.